Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Tower of Babble podcast. As always, I'm Julian Mush. I'm joined by Daniel D'Souza and Jeremy Kozier.
Hello.
And this is a special episode. It's been a long time coming, years in the works, and we've been so much planning has gone into this, so much work.
Road.
Yeah, and it's finally here. So we're gonna be talking about Zack Snyder's Justice League, colloquially known as the Snyder Cut.
Release the Snyder Cut.
Hashtag release the Snyder Cut. Hashtag the Snyder Cut's been released. Hashtag restore the Snyderverse, which is the new one. I don't know how much we want to get into that. We'll save that for later, I think. But before we get into the festivities, I'll remind everyone to follow us on Twitter at TowerBabblecast and Facebook.com/TowerBabblecast. We are doing this live on Twitter Live. I don't know what they call it now. It used to be called Periscope. It's not called that anymore. I don't know. So Twitter Live, Facebook used to be on. We're not on Facebook anymore either. That's a lie. I keep lying.
Stop
I'm
lying
lying
to
people.
people. You can't lie to people.
It also used to be called the Facebook.
That's true. But then they said, and then Justin Timberlake came around and he said, drop the.
And everyone was like, huh. Yeah.
Anyways, we are on Facebook, but facebook.com/TowerBabblecast, not live. We're not recording live there. We are on Twitch and YouTube and whatever the Periscope name is. And we encourage you to join us. So go subscribe to those, click the bell so you get notifications when we go live. We'll hang out in the chat if you like. So let's really dive deep into this movie because there's so much. It's 4 hours long.
4 full hours.
To be fair, 4 hours 2 minutes according to this IMDb page. And it's rated R. And it was released in the year 2021. The theatrical, not the original, I'm going to try to call it the theatrical release of Justice League came out in what year, Jeremy?
2017.
2017. It was a different time. It was a different time. We were different people back then. And this whole deal, this whole Snyder verse started way back in 2013 with Man of Steel. So I think that's where we need to start. Okay, so we're gonna go around the horn, ask you guys how you felt about this movie, about Man of Steel, where you were, and then we're gonna move kind of through the decade here towards BVS and then into Justice League, and we'll touch on the rest of the members of the JLA as well. So, Dan, why don't you kick us off? What did you think of Man of Steel way back in 2013 when Zack Snyder kind of took over the DCEU?
I remember really enjoying Man of Steel personally. I think one of the things that's hard to avoid with this whole conversation, I'm going to try to be cognizant of it, is how often we compare these movies with their direct competition with the Marvel movies.
Right.
It's always been a thing, and you want to look at these movies in a vacuum, of course. But like at the time, I definitely remember comparing Man of Steel to Iron Man 1 and thinking it was a completely serviceable Superman movie, pretty good story.
Yeah.
But that's kind of it. It didn't blow me away, but it's pretty solid, all things considered. Man of Steel.
Yeah. Okay. Fair. Marcos, friend of the show, good to see you in the chat. He says, so this is going to be twice as long as the movie, right? Which, no, it's not. This is not going to be an 8. Could you imagine an 8-hour podcast?
I don't have it in me, man. I tell you right now, I don't have it in me.
That's an audio book at that point. And so, no. The joke, I think, is that typically our podcasts are twice as long as the actual thing we're reviewing.
Yeah.
At least in television world. But that's not true for me.
Yeah, because it would be for this if we went like scene by scene, but
yeah, could you imagine? What would you have to say about that like 15 minutes where those girls sang in like Icelandic?
Well, I mean, we go right off the bat. That's probably my least favorite part of the movie.
I was stunned when that happened.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, we should say full spoilers for all of the DCEU, including the newest one, including Zack Snyder's Justice League, because I don't think there's just too many interconnected pieces here to just not be able to just jump to Icelandic women singing in the forest or whatever. So full spoilers, be aware of that. If you haven't seen it yet, I recommend settling in with like 2-3 buckets of popcorn because it's gonna be a long night. But settle in and watch the movie. It's worth it. And I would say do it in one night if you can. I think you're behooved to do that. It's I think, a better experience.
But we are getting ahead of ourselves here because aren't we still talking about?
We're still talking about Man of Steel. Okay. So let's back up again.
Let me just give you my my impression after Daniel there. I'm kind of in the same boat as Dan, but I think I enjoyed it more. I think like this whole take, the realism, the mythological elements of it, and just kind of putting it in today's world, for me it's just more exciting, and has more weight to it. But I also see the kind of negative side of it. I think that intrinsically just creates a divide in terms of expectations and what people, they want to see. And when Daniel mentions the comparisons, I think, and he even mentioned Iron Man 1, without even wanting to compare, but it's still always going to be there no matter what. So I think that really showcases the divide and where that stems from. But for me, just in terms of, what Warner Brothers was doing with Christopher Nolan Dark Knight before, then leading into Man of Steel, with what Marvel was doing on their side, I was just super excited to see this realistic imagining kind of unfold, and all the elements of that movie in terms of the music, even the casting of Henry Cavill, just really worked for me. And even General Zod, I just thought was brilliant.
Oh, Michael Shannon.
He is really good. He's my favorite part of that movie, I think, in a lot of ways.
And then even the fleshing out of the Krypton stuff with Russell Crowe, I think, really building that relationship with Jor-El and also Jonathan Kent, the two father figures, I think really just pays off in that movie. But I think it also struggles too because of the idea of what Superman is, what he represents, and how he should be handled. Yeah. And I think just to kind of set us up in terms of, we're talking a lot about Zack Snyder and his take. I don't know if it's his goal to necessarily have this divide. I think he has said that he'd rather have people kind of, have these discussions over, what should happen or what shouldn't, rather than just giving you kind of straight up, what you'd expect, which is, I guess, essentially what the other side of the coin is doing. So,
yeah. I mean, again, without trying to make too many connections to or comparisons to Marvel, but what Marvel is doing in a lot of ways is taking what's on the page in their comic books and bringing to the screen in like a really how do I describe this? And like it really feels like a photocopy of the comic book page. Like the bright colors and the costumes are very similar, and it feels more true to those stories and the way that those stories are told, especially in a long form kind of MCU kind of way. And it works. I think no one disagrees. We all like the Marvel stuff. I watched Falcon Winter Soldier yesterday. Really enjoyed the first episode of that. Maybe we'll probably talk about that in a following regular TOB episode as well. But there's just so much Marvel stuff, right? And we know that DC has been lagging behind. And when Man of Steel came out, there was already several years of MCU stuff like already happening. Like we were already on our way towards the first Avengers movie, and we knew that.
Which is what kind of led us to the sequel to Man of Steel in the first place, right? Really trying to develop that world in a speedy way, essentially, right? To bring in all these characters to do that catch up type thing, which I think doesn't get enough kind of discussion in terms of why these screenplays were made to include all these characters. Because I've always said, like, with BVS, we've all had mixed kind of reviews on that one. Even me, like, I'm not a huge fan of that movie, but I dig the nightmare kind of stuff and just the seriousness of just the impact of what the whole Man of Steel set up, right, with the alien and all that stuff. So, what did you think of?
Well, let me kind of.
I guess you didn't do Man of Steel yet.
Get my take of Man of Steel, which is that at the time when Man of Steel came out, I remember, Jeremy, we talked about it. Like, we were really stoked. I was like, man, this is the first time I've ever seen Superman kind of like. I've seen his like strength really portrayed on the screen in a kind of visceral way. And I remember coming out of that movie thinking, man, this is sweet. But I also got to think, it's 2013. I'm a lot younger. That type of movie is going to be much more attractive to me, I think. And I remember then a lot of the backlash to Man of Steel, and even that movie had was more generally well liked, but even that had a little bit polarized because there's that third act, which it has Superman like throwing Zod through all these buildings, and there's a lot. And then remember at the time there's a lot of backlash, like, man, Superman must have killed like thousands of people, in this fight with Zod.
Right.
And I thought about that and I was like, yeah, that is kind of crazy. And then he breaks Zod's neck in that movie, right? And that was the first time that I was like, man, I don't know if I'm really fully on board with this take.
We're not ready
Superman.
for this.
I don't think anyone really wants to see Superman break people's necks. Like, I don't think, is that what people want? I don't know.
And then from that, the assumption was that they were trying to make the DC a darker version of the Marvel universe. Like, that was like they were trying to go for a tonal difference, right, a distinction, and it was about making it darker. And it certainly was the case in BVS. It was definitely a darker tone.
Yes, it was.
Whether or not that's successful is subjective, but
I also think
I don't know if the aim was for a darker tone, but it was definitely a specific tone with Christopher Nolan being a producer on this film too.
Mm-hmm.
But they always did say that BVS was supposed to be like the darkest of all of them. Like they're eventually, which I think we could probably all agree with. Justice League transitions away from that.
Pretty hard too. Yeah.
But that was always the intent, based off the story matter and the perception that you're seeing the story from, which is essentially Batman. Which is another problem the movie suffered, was expectations on Superman again, right? Which really led the narrative of that he wasn't the Superman that people grew up with. The typical. We all remember that.
We had the same conversation. But that movie also, by the way, BVS suffers from a Batman that's also fairly unrecognizable. So, I think as we fast forward, so Kevin Gregoire in the YouTube chat says 4 hours of meh. I mean, we haven't got to this yet, but I mean we'll come back to that. We'll get to BVS and I remember BVS was announced at Comic-Con. Jeremy, you probably remember this. It was like there was
and they had
footage leaked.
They had maybe. Well, I think before that they announced it and they showed like the logo or something like that, and everyone was freaking out, right? Because that logo was in the I Am Legend Will Smith movie, like on a building one time, and like oh yeah, that'd be crazy if that ever happened. But they actually had Henry Lennox say a couple lines from the Dark Knight Returns graphic novel.
Right.
When Bruce was talking to Clark, basically when he's about to beat him or whatever. So that was pretty cool, just the way they announced that.
Yeah, and Henry Lennox's voice is obviously very iconic. He's really cool. I just remember that was super excited, and we thought, man, what a cool idea to do a Batman versus Superman movie. I think we were all kind of on board for the idea, but we've also never got a true Man of Steel sequel. And by the way, this has been a criticism of that movie and Justice League, which is that like we did one Superman origin movie, and then we just fast forward to Justice League, and the second movie is basically a Batman movie, and it's like, man, that's kind of frustrating, especially if you really like Man of Steel. Sean Tennyson also in the YouTube chat saying good evening. Good evening to you, sir, as well. So Batman versus Superman is, I think, where things get really tough, because that movie was really polarizing, more so than even Man of Steel was. Not maybe as much as like where we got to with Justice League and or whatever modern culture and now with like the Star Wars stuff. Like, it was just like it seemed to permeate everything right around that same time.
It was one of the earlier ones, but definitely part of that trend of where this toxic fandom thing kind of came from, right? Where things became polarizing. It's like it's a word that we didn't typically use for this kind of stuff before.
No, not really.
Not to this degree, anyways. Or I don't know. Maybe that's me saying that because we're so embedded in it right now.
Yeah, it's hard to see. It's maybe hard to see the forest through the trees, but I think with BVS is where I really started to consider, and obviously we had been doing podcasting for much more of that period. So my kind of way I looked at movies became much more critical. I looked at movies in a much more critical eye, and I started thinking about the creators behind them and the way movies are made, and So I became
better or for worse.
Yeah, for better or for worse. I became more aware of, like, let's say Zack Snyder's his tone, like what he brings to filmmaking. Like I remember really liking 300, great movie, right? But I didn't really associate, that's Zack Snyder, and then so is also Watchmen, and so is also Sucker. Like that really didn't really start clicking into me until before this movie, or BVS, but around that time, right? And I think at that point I'm like thinking, coming out of BVS, like, is Zack Snyder the right person to be shepherding this? And I think, by the way, I think the studio wondered the same thing at the time because of the reaction of the movie, which was like, this is really grim.
Right.
And whatever, like there's not a lot of people who really liked it, especially the director's cut, which is, by the way, like a long, I think at this point become kind of like an in joke with Zack Snyder stuff, which is like, oh no, the theatrical release isn't for everybody. You have to watch the director's cut. All of his director's cuts are like the best versions of the movie, right? But typically way longer.
Nothing wrong with that too.
That's fine.
I love a good director's cut.
And that right there is an example of just kind of his artistic, his visions or whatever. Because and to compare it to what's happening now is that he doesn't set out to make these, or like he sets out to make these movies and they end up being long or whatever. But I don't think it's like the intent to always do that. It's just in terms of these characters, like, especially Justice League, like you think of it on a character's story, you need to like make people like buy into. It's just such a crazy task. And then in terms of connecting the universe and the shepherding and all that stuff, if you really look into it, all they had planned was like this, at some point, this 5-film arc. But that was after Man of Steel, so they wanted to speed to get to Justice League, right? Which is why BVS included Wonder Woman and all these things.
You guys remember when they like announced Batman? I forgot about this, but it's called Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Remember that?
That was Warner Brothers. They wanted that
right
on there.
Which is a stupid subtitle.
Wasn't it at one point? I feel like we talked about this on the podcast at one point. Wasn't it at one point going to be called like Part 1, and then there was going to be a Part 2?
No,
that was Justice League.
Justice League. Yeah, and then you were upset because you're like, movies shouldn't be called Part 1 and Part 2. Just tell one movie.
Well, that was around the time when movies were splitting up. It was like the last Harry Potter movie.
Yeah.
It's well after the last Harry Potter movie, I think.
Well, I'm just saying, like, around that time was when they were it was just popular to split it up. But the thing is,
more money grab.
is that, again, in terms of expectations and comparisons, right? Shepherding whatever expectations you have there,
or lack thereof.
All that was laid out was that he did that movie. They want to speed up to Justice League, so let's get him to do this. And then they pitched the Lord of the Rings type of trilogy of the Justice League type of movies, right? And they went ahead with it, but then in terms of the reaction to BVS, it was almost too late because they kind of filmed everything, and then the tragedy happened. It was just this time and place where they decided to let's shift our focus to more of what the competition is doing, and to not eliminate certain audiences, obviously the younger audience, and just really make our version of these heroes kind of pop and live throughout. And then when you get this movie, you realize, like it's this mythological take that's dark and has weird choices, but it's a self-contained kind of 5-film arc, or right now only 3, but a potential 5-film arc, and it would basically just end there. It's not necessarily supposed to be like Zack Snyder's the Kevin Feige deciding kind of where everything branches. It's just Warner Brothers, they just didn't really have
a vision,
foresight to plan this out, and then people like Jeff Johns kind of interjected in a weird time, brought in Joss Whedon, and you get the 2017 theatrical cut.
Yeah, and okay, so is there anything else you guys want to touch on regarding the DCEU prior to where we are now? Like, I think I can, from my perspective, I really liked the original Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman 1984 less so. We talked about that movie. I really liked Aquaman. That movie has its own problems, but it's at least like exciting and fun, and like tells introduces you to an interesting world. It's like it's an Aquaman movie, so like what are you really expecting? Like, you know what I mean? Like
it's gonna be fantastical.
Like sure, there's octopus playing drums. Like if that's not in there, like I'm kind of upset about it. You know?
It has to be. Any mermaid movie has to have an octopus playing drums, right? And the drums are actually clamshells,
right, or something. And by the way, drums underwater don't really make much sense. Like, but whatever. But like, do you guys like? What did you guys feel about those other DCEU movies before Justice League, or even after Justice League in certain cases?
Yeah, I mean, the first Wonder Woman is a solid movie. The first Wonder Woman is probably the best thing that DC has put out of this entire run of movies.
Yeah, probably.
And Aquaman, like you said, very fantastical, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think that movie is tight from a story structure
it's got
perspective.
some, there's lots of problems.
But whatever, it is a fun, just like crazy Aquaman movie where you throw everything to the wall. Like there is no realism, and it doesn't have to be in that movie.
No.
So they're fine. The thing that they've always they are also very distinct. They don't do as much or enough of what Marvel does with connective tissue.
Well, they stopped trying at that point,
right? And I think that's what, to your point, Jeremy, that's what they're trying to do with streamlining the Justice League movies and really focusing on team up quickly, right?
That is exactly what their goal was, and I remember just kind of being like, when it all kind of happened, obviously there wasn't all the information out there, but I was like, okay, I mean, they're bringing in Joss. That's kind of cool, right?
I think we thought like, okay, interesting
at the time. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and we kind of jumped on that narrative. Yeah, like Snyder's movies lack, humor or this or that. And I remember kind of being bummed about that too, because I just really like his style and big fan of his movies. And then just as the years went on, people were like, well, they're kind of comparing the trailers and digging up the news stories and what they were saying about how they're going to finish his vision and just bring Joss in, and they're just going to do this and that, and then just to see what they did with it and how they handled it was just brutal, which kind of led to the backlash and people online, right, just being like, starting that hashtag, right?
It really
release the Snyder Cut.
For me at the time, because I never jumped on the release the Snyder Cut. I don't train really in the same way, but when the Joss Whedon version of Justice League came out, it really let a lot of air out of the balloon for me for the DCEU. Like I kind of stopped giving a shit. Like I was like, well, like at least Marvel's doing some really cool stuff. I'm really interested. Like I really like the interconnected elements, and I like how they are patient and they're willing to do have these kind of character moments in their movie. And by the way, the Marvel movies are far from perfect either. Like they're not they're not perfect, but I think they're pretty good. Like there really isn't like a lot of stinkers in the bunch. There's might be some boring ones, whatever, but there's not a lot of bad movies. And I remember, Jeremy, you point this all the time about like how I even wrote on our blog about how I thought there was room for kind of these multiple tones, and I still kind of do, but when you had like you're seeing the success on one side, and then you're just seeing this other group just like stumble over themselves constantly, it's like you really have a hard time rooting for them, and that's kind of how I felt about kind of where the DCU was at the time. And so when like things like I didn't even bring this up, but like Suicide Squad came out, I was like, okay, seems like it's interesting, and that also had that kind of like, oh, the trailers are really cool. And then they recut that movie, and that became even shittier. And then, and then I was like, just whatever.
You had those two movies that they essentially messed with.
Yeah.
And then you had the outside movies that were good, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and then even Shazam.
Shazam
right?
too.
And they were inviting their different tones, but still trying to stay in the same universe and all that stuff. And those were cool. But yeah, they just couldn't really escape kind of what their decision essentially. But I also like almost don't blame them, because like you said, when you see that success, why wouldn't you want to attain that, especially when you know what kind of characters you're working with. Or they didn't know what kind of characters they were working with, they just knew they had a lot, the people up top, right?
Well, which is kind of the problem, right? Like they didn't have really the same respect for what Marvel did, which was really patient, right? I mean, and by the way, Marvel didn't even have their like Superman, and they didn't have their Batman, like those. Spider-Man didn't come into the MCU until later.
We can give Marvel like tons of credit, but like when you talk about patience, it's like they were the first ones to kind of just jump in there, and they started with their singular hero movies. It's not like
and then you can even argue that the second movie.
They didn't even like necessarily have this huge plan. It just kind of, as they were rolling out, right? Because you had the 3 or 4 solo movies, and then there was the group one. So
I guess you could. Then you can, maybe not patience is the right word, but like out of necessity, like they didn't have all access to all their characters. They're like, we're going to start with Iron Man, and then it was a success, so they built off of that, and it just became, that's just how it had to be, so it worked out, and they were kind of constrained, and we see this all the time. But like the best stuff comes out of like limitations. When you have the ability to do anything, you end up with like really weird stuff like like Justice League, you know, and for better or for worse, you know. So I think before we even get into Justice League, I want to ask you guys about casting choices. So, Jeremy, you mentioned you really like Henry Cavill's Superman. I think a lot of people feel that way. I pretty much like Henry Cavill's Superman. I feel like hasn't been given the right scripts, I think, since Man of Steel in a lot of ways. And that's not his fault. I think he's a good choice for the character. Gal Gadot, same thing. I think she's a great Wonder Woman. So much so that they made everybody talk like her on Themyscira. Sometimes. But where do we feel about the rest of the casting choices in MCU? I think we look at
DC.
The DCU. And a lot of it's good, but I think there's room for improvement in a lot of places. And they're just not. They weren't quite as strong. I think we were excited about Ben Affleck as Batman, but I think I don't know if we is the appropriate
sorry, I
was excited about Ben Affleck as Batman, and I think I'll walk statement back. I don't really like his take on Batman anymore. Now in light of having seen him in 2 movies, and the supporting cast around it is good, but I don't think great. What do you guys feel about but Jesse Eisenberg, by the way, stands out for me. I think he's a terrible Lex Luthor. I can't abide his Lex Luthor.
It's so hard to say because he hasn't been given enough room to grow the character, right? Like he's effectively been like a glorified cameo in a couple movies, right? Like,
well, I don't know. I mean, he has enough.
I guess BVS he has enough of a role.
He sticks a candy in some guy's mouth. Remember, like it's weird shit.
I'm not saying it's not weird. I would prefer to be able to see more of it before casting judgment, I guess. But I think that the challenge with all the DCEU stuff, and it happens with their casting as well, is it's inconsistent. There's some great casting choices and some that just don't work, and that kind of plays into the whole thing with the tone being inconsistent. Is that I don't necessarily think that they have the best chemistry going on with the casting choices.
Yeah,
and it kind of shows.
Yeah, that's fair. Jimmy, what do you think about the casting?
I think I largely disagree. I think the casting is pretty great, like across the board. I think it's also cool and unique that Zack's basically, handpicked each of them and sold them on their story/journey, and kind of picked these people out of, like, a lot of them, like, were like the biggest, most famous one has been Affleck out of.
Yeah, everyone else is kind of
thing here,
more.
right? Like,
Gal Gadot was fairly unknown. Yeah,
Gal Gadot was completely unknown before. She was just a side character in a Fast and Furious movie, essentially before that. Jason Momoa, obviously, on his way to superstardom. I think he was offered the role of Drax in the MCU, but turned it down. And then Zack had the idea to cast him as Aquaman. So I don't know. For me, I just think his casting ability is unmatched. I think picking Henry Cavill as Superman was one of the greatest casting choices, along with Gal Gadot. Ben Affleck, I've always been a little iffy on, but it's one of those things where he's so famous, it's hard to separate the actor, from the person or whatever, or the character. I think he was brutal in the Joss Whedon version. I mean,
I don't think he's that much better here, to be honest.
In the Joss one, like the reshoots are just, they don't do him any favors at all. I think here there's definitely more character development and a want and desire and transition from BVS to this one.
Yeah.
But also I think he had a lot of like personal struggles throughout this entire filming, which kind of also led him to not really want to do this anymore. And I think you can also see it like in his kind of his weight fluctuation in this movie, because there's some scenes where he's like ripped, and then it's just So I don't necessarily care to cast judgment on that whole thing. I just think I really liked him in BVS. I hated him in the 2017 theatrical cut. I thought he was completely phoning it in, and he was, because it was basically all reshoots. And in this one, I think it's fine. Like there wasn't anything that really jumped out too much, but I think he was definitely like a better member, like, of the team, just way better represented this time around.
Batman's barely in this movie, like for the record. I mean, we'll get to that in a second, but you say he does not done any favors. I mean, he's barely in the movie, in my opinion. Like, from my recollection, Batman specifically is barely in the movie. Bruce Wayne is in a lot of it.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
but Batman
I also
is
think
like, he's in like 3 scenes.
I think that makes sense in terms of what his goal is in bringing the people together. It's not like
Sure.
Like I think it's almost like it's just funny. Like he's in this bat costume, but like I don't know. It's a weird balance that you have to like the realism and the comic book stuff. It's
Mhm.
like Batman is just there to kind of really service these people and make this happen. He's not gonna be out there,
Well,
flipping
what's he gonna do against
batarangs.
Steppenwolf? Yeah.
But the thing is that we do see that. We see where he fits in, and his battles with the parademons, all that stuff. So I don't know. I just don't know how he
He
gets
gets his
up there
ass
and
kicked by the
yeah.
parademons in the
But I don't know if there's
underground.
any like why like what is like is he just supposed to be like perfect? Like I don't know.
like, I
feel
I
like
was
in
This has always been the challenge with Batman. It's like, what is he doing there? These are interdimensional beings that, of
Yeah.
course, he's just some dude.
But
he makes it work.
yeah,
right?
the
He's
cartoon's done it. Like it made it work.
Well, but I think that's the point that Jeremy's
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
making is that it lends itself to comic books
Sure.
and cartoons because there's less
Correct.
realism inherent in that medium. In a movie,
So here, yeah, it's like this hurt kind of aging, guy.
Yeah, 20 years as Batman. Yeah.
And his last, because again, this is supposed to be that 5-film arc where, essentially he's probably going to die at the end of it.
Yeah.
To where what he does is, bring back the age of heroes, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I was thinking about this while I was golfing earlier, and there's this kind of this concept of Batman that Grant Morrison kind of writes when he writes Batman, which is the Bat God version of Batman, which is like he is the best at everything, right?
peak human.
And I think that's my favorite version of Batman in a Justice League context. When you're using Batman next to Superman, Wonder Woman, and all these like superpowered beings, unless he is peak human, it's you really being like, what the fuck is this guy doing here? You start to question it more. But if you can have him 2 steps ahead of everybody at all times, I think that becomes interesting because you're like, how did he know? What's like,
I don't know.
I don't know. For me, that's how I like it.
That doesn't become interesting. That just becomes like there's no like turmoil there. There's no conflict there. It's just a really cool dude, right? With the Kevin Conroy voice just always in the back. So I understand that, and I think that's my favorite version of Batman too. But I like the struggle that he has throughout these movies. I think it paints him a bit more human-like, but which again, it all depends on expectations. Like, do you want him to be that favorite version or not? So
right.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, like it's the struggle doesn't work as well for me because if you back up one movie, the struggle all starts at that Martha scene that everyone looks back on and is like, man, that's really lame, right?
Yeah.
And we still think that and whatever, but like his whole thing is like he switches at that moment to being on Team Superman, and then Superman dies 5 minutes later in that movie. And this movie, by the way, feels very much like a direct sequel to BVS, more so than the theatrical release did. And well, yeah, but it basically picks up.
Supposed to be.
Yeah, but I get that. But you could argue that a Justice League movie following BVS, you could have done like a time jump. You could have got away with it. Is what I'm saying. And this is like we'll pick up like immediately after, which is by the way makes it even more weird because now you have Batman or Superman dead for like what, a month, before he's resurrected here, and it like I feel like if you start to think about those things, it starts to fall apart a little bit. So like Batman's struggle is like he felt bad about killing, having Superman die, basically.
He probably felt guilty, right? Because like part of the story is that they shouldn't have been enemies, right? Like that's the classic,
right?
They're 2 sides of the same coin. They should have been working together, right? So I understand that in terms of motivation. I think that does make sense. Superman was the best defense the world had, and Batman is partially guilty for having gotten him killed. Like I can understand as motivation for what happens to Batman in Justice League. It's good enough.
Yeah, it's
and
I
Batman
guess.
too. He was also kind of the 2 steps ahead type Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least trying to be.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess the only other thing I would mention about this casting thing before we get like more just directly into Justice League, I know we've been touching on it every once in a while here, is my take on Ezra Miller's Flash. It remains the same coming out of this version of Justice League. Is I'm still not a fan. I don't like his version of Flash. I just don't. And
it was so much better this time around.
It's better. It's certainly better. I will definitely agree with you there. But like, sure, maybe he's not given enough to do necessarily. And he's still kind of young, and we can say, well, maybe after the 5 movie arc, he would have felt more the Flash we know, but it's hard to speculate on that. I mean, the version of the Flash that we get here doesn't do anything for me.
That's the thing too about the 5-film arc. Like you rehash the BVS and how quick things happen. I think like I'm not on that type of like tip because like I was at one point, but I guess once I knew about how this is this self-contained 5-film thing, I think at that point you're not going to care like how long this happened or how long that happened. It's just you have all these huge godlike characters in this saga of like, and it all like kind of spins around the formation of the Justice League and their greatest enemy. And I just think it's like a really cool like world that they can build within these 5 films. I think again it's expectations and comparisons that really hinder this process from kind of flourishing and just concluding.
Kevin Gregoire says, "Great Bruce, terrible Batman." I would agree with that for Ben Affleck. I like his Bruce Wayne. We get a lot of Bruce Wayne in this movie, and I think he's fine. you know,
definitely better as Bruce than as Batman.
Yeah.
And I would say the same about Wonder Woman this entire time. I think she's great as Diana Prince, and I've never really liked Gal Gadot in the Wonder Woman like outfit. It always, I think mostly it's the action sequences, and that's mostly CG, but it looks weird.
You didn't like the crouching and blocking the bullets.
Not
at the
just
same
that.
time?
Like, there's always been something about it. She looks great for like the classic Snyder like slow motion like panning.
Yeah.
You know.
The
triumphant
splash
music
pages,
shot. Yeah, she looks great there, and she's great as Diana Prince. But her as Wonder Woman in motion, I never really thought it looked the same as it does in the comics.
I've never had that thought. I've always thought she looked great as Gal Gadot, or as she looked great as Gal Gadot. I always thought she looked great as Wonder Woman. But okay, so let's get into the movie in earnest. Before we do, let me remind everyone at home that we have a Patreon to help support the show, and a lot of our patrons are in the chat right now. And if you want to help support the show, keep the lights on, get a little bit of bonus content, we do a monthly film club. You can head over to patreon.com/TowerBabblecast. And for $5 a month, like I said, you get access to that film club. Dan, what movie are we doing this month?
We went with the Mars theme this month, so we're doing Mission to Mars in honor of the Perseverance landing.
And that'll be, I guess, we'll record that next weekend. So that will be... we'll put that at some time around the 27th, 28th, 29th of this month. Okay, let's get into this. It's a 4-hour movie, so we should probably get moving here. This movie starts, and we're not going to go scene by scene, but this movie does start, with the aftermath or the immediate aftermath of BVS, and as Superman is quote unquote dying, we get this kind of like. There's a lot of odd moments, I think, in this movie. One of them for me is this idea of like following these sound waves of Superman dying.
Come on,
you don't like this? You like that?
This is the thing. It's like I've heard people say that, but as you're watching the movie, right, we're re-engaging with the story at hand. Superman has died, this god, right? And it's not about like tracking these or counting these beams. It's essentially, reaching every level of like kind of. We see Cyborg first because it wakes up the Mother Box. We see Lex Luthor in Metropolis when he's doing the Steppenwolf thing. We see a glimpse of Steppenwolf there in the 3 Mother Boxes. He reaches Atlantis.
Right. By the way, that's funny that they included that scene because that is the scene that I don't know if you guys remember this. It's a deleted scene that was released on YouTube. Remember this, Dan? Remember you got upset about it. You're like, they released it on YouTube or something like a week after the movie came out. And it was like, this is a deleted scene, but we thought this was really important to include. So here it is, completely out of context on YouTube. And it was like, oh, that does provide more context because he's talking to Steppenwolf or something. Yeah. And they show it here. But I think it's funny if you haven't seen it.
Then we see Atlantis and Mera and then Themyscira and the Amazon. So I don't know. I just think, like, I watched the beginning again, and it was just, I was able to just kind of take in the opening credits, and just kind of see everyone learning of the fact that Superman's dead and that these Mother Boxes are awakened. So I think that's the goal kind of this opening sequence. It's not really necessary to
no, I get it. And they talk about
sound
it
waves look or move or how many. I think I just don't care about those conversations.
I don't necessarily even care about that element either. I just think I don't know if we necessarily need the sound waves being visualized.
It's not about the physics of it. Yeah, but you don't need to see them because I think the scene is probably more effective if you don't see them and if you just hear an echo of the scream and it's just I love the idea of Superman's death reverberating around the world. That makes sense.
That's cool.
That's part of that, them being gods, them being larger than life sort of thing, right?
Yeah, and but Jeremy, you keep mentioning this, by the way, this mythology, this idea that it's mythological take. And I've heard this now a couple times in different places, and I don't remember where I originally heard it. And it might have even been from Snyder. I don't remember where that conversation came. But this idea that it's mythological and this tale is supposed to feel like a modern myth, and myths don't always make sense. They just they're telling the story. And I feel like that's not necessarily fair, or I think it's a little bit of a cheat to be able to say, well, it's like a myth and myths don't always make sense, so this movie doesn't always have to make sense. That being said, I do like the idea of approaching the storytelling as if it were a myth, this very as if we're telling the story of gods, almost like Greek mythology, which is often obviously used here when they talk about the Age of Heroes and stuff. But
it's used just because people are most familiar with Greek mythology as opposed to Norse or anything else. But in terms of the mythology comparison, that's been a thing in the comics forever. The classic comparison is the Justice League is like the Greek pantheon of gods, right? And then the Avengers are more like the Argonauts. It's like a group of heroes that got together, but they are very much more humans with special powers, whereas the gods are the gods.
Right. Which obviously, by the way, and we've talked about this for a while, it presents its own challenges. Telling stories with Superman, telling stories with Wonder Woman, these Aquaman who have these larger-than-life abilities, are really hard. It's and I'm not necessarily saying oh, that's not a problem for me. That's a you problem, but it kind of is, I don't want to have to necessarily excuse all these kind of plot holes or kind of weirdnesses in the movie. And again, I generally like the movie, by the way. We haven't said that. I generally liked the 4-hour Zack Snyder's Justice League. I overall did. I mean, you don't sit down and watch a full 4-hour movie if you're not liking it.
Well,
in some
I feel
way.
like this is one of those ones that we kind of felt obligated to, but
well,
I would
sure.
also say that I enjoyed it. I think it's an improvement in every way on the original.
Right, and Kevin Gregoire makes a great point here. He says myths don't need to make sense, but movies do, and I think that's kind of where what I'm getting at. Thank you.
Yeah, get out of here, Sean. We don't want to spoil anything. Enjoy the movie.
Yeah, so Sean Dennis is taken off because he wants to watch the movie. Fair enough, because we are getting deep into this. Well, luckily we've only really talked about the beginning, so. That being said, Jeremy, touching on those showing us the Amazons and showing us the other boxes and where they are, I really liked that stuff actually, and I think especially the Amazons come off really cool, really really cool in this movie. Probably more cool than they have in any of the other versions of them, I think, that we've seen.
Well, I don't know. I mean, in the original version of this movie, the Amazons
Yeah.
are pretty badass too, right?
Yeah.
That scene wasn't too extended, if I remember correctly.
It's not that much different. It is a little bit different.
Well, I mean, it feels. I think just overall, it just feels different.
Yeah.
For me at least. I also watched it with my nephews yesterday, and during that scene, he actually said, "This is 18 million times better than the theatrical cut."
Theatrical
Because
version.
we went to the
That's
theater
funny.
and see that one.
Yeah.
And then he was kind of confused. I think he's like 9, but he's kind of confused as to why we're watching it again. But he kind of got the sense that I told him it was rated R and it's longer and there's more. So I just thought that was funny that he said that.
You let your 9-year-old then have you watch a rated R
Well, I
movie?
mean, it's not even
Yeah,
a
fair
hard
enough.
R. It's not
Yeah, that-
rated R like
yeah.
we want to be rated R. It's just it's just there for the certain scenes that just they want it to be very serious and impactful. And even with the Wonder Woman scene, I think is the first one, right? Where she saves the kids there, or the bank from exploding. It's
From
set up
Bolton.
it's set up very dark and kind of we're not getting out of this. Even the music change. That's another huge thing about this entire movie. Is the music is just it's so good. The main theme. I love the main theme. That's the Crew at War Power, which I mentioned in the Discord. I don't know if you remember that when I said, "Have you ever listened to Crew at War Power at full volume?"
I was like, oh yeah, no, I didn't know what the fuck you're talking about.
That's the main theme song, that kind of rousing, build-up theme song here.
By the way, with speaking of the music, one of the things I watched the Screen Crush videos that kind of break down stuff. I really like those videos. I think they're really, really good. Jeremy, I think you introduced them to me, and
Right.
they talk about how the Superman theme, this like the amazing Superman theme that we've had now since Man of Steel,
Yeah.
crescendos in this movie. It actually reaches a
It's at the
crescendo,
end.
like an actual moment at the end
where
the
action climax there, right?
Yeah, and it's like that is
Cool.
it was very satisfying. I really liked that, and Jackie XL does a great job with the score here. I like what they bring in, that kind of that like choir with the Amazons.
It's a new Amazon song there. It works really well because it shows up with Diana, but then whenever Diana's doing crazy stuff or Wonder Woman,
you
it
get the
goes
theme.
to the original one with like it's more upbeat and like the rock riff. And then every time we transition to Hippolyta and stuff, it goes back to that slower kind of singing stuff, which really works.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean the movie I think gets off to a really good like start in the sense that it has a lot of momentum early on, and I think it sags in the middle. When we when we go to, for instance, when we cut to that scene that is somewhat different, I think is largely kept pretty similar from the theatrical release, which is that Batman trying to recruit Aquaman scene. Yeah. Minus the I hear you talk to fish line, but basically at that moment for the next hour, I think it's like pretty, like I don't really even remember necessarily what happened. It's like not that exciting until you get to, again, the moment where Diana like talks about the original Age of Heroes and we get that flashback scene, which is fucking awesome.
Always awesome.
By the way, what do you guys think of the Green Lantern cameo here? I mean, not cameo. Apparently, he's an actual character that's referenced in the books and whatever of a protector of that sector from 1,000 years ago, whatever.
Yeah, I think it's like Yalan Gur or something is his name. But it was the Lantern in the theatrical cut. It's just we see him a bit differently here, like some of the shots.
We barely got to see him in the theatrical cut. Like you just like have a green glow and that's about it. And you get to see that.
Here I
like that you see them die.
Cool
yeah, I like that you see him die and then the ring kind of go boom, 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 boom. I like, and then
Darkseid almost grabs it.
Darkseid almost grabs it. I'm like, what is that? What happens if Darkseid grabs a power ring? I was like, see, like that's what I really like.
Yeah, I mean that whole sequence is it's super cool. I mean, in the theatrical cut it was Steppenwolf. This time it's Darkseid, just kind of explaining his history with this planet. But for me it was so much more like framed better in terms of the heroes that were there, like Zeus and who else is there with them? It's
Ares is there.
Ares. I just loved how it just
By the way, I love that Ares has that same stupid mustache that he has from the original Wonder Woman. Remember, he's that like old British guy, and he's still got that stupid mustache in this. I thought that was a nice touch because they didn't have to do that, and I thought that was fun.
Yeah, I just liked how the story was told and how it just worked out for just everyone kind of coming together there and protecting Earth.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It has an incredibly strong start, but I believe the theatrical version also had a very strong start because I think it's largely due to that Amazon scene.
Right, fair enough.
That came a bit later. I mean, I think the theatrical cut started with that Batman parademon sequence,
which is not in this movie, and I actually kind of missed that scene because I liked that.
Really?
At the original movie. I just liked having more Batman stuff at the beginning.
The only thing I liked in that one was the imagery of him like perched on that wire. Swaying back and forth. Other than that, it just felt kind of out of place, and I knew it was a Whedon kind of reshoot.
Well, I don't know. It was. I remember at the time thinking like, what is and what's not reshot, and we didn't know.
Yeah, well, I saw the movie like 5 times, and I was able to decipher it and figure it out.
And then like this movie, I think what surprised me is that there's a lot of the original movie, more than I thought was actually in the theatrical cut. But it was moved around and recut with different elements that it really, and it's, by the way, this is kind of a really cool example of how you can recut a movie to make it feel completely different.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
And obviously there's a lot of reshoots and stuff, and people talked about how the CG sucked, but really I think the biggest part of the reason the CG sucked in that theatrical version is because they didn't have time to actually make it look good. So I don't know. So I don't really care about that argument. I would actually care more here that like some of the CG in this movie is still kind of questionable.
All of it. the CG was terrible in this movie.
I don't know. I was fine. I was fine with it. I thought like the horses, specifically in that Amazon scene, looked really weird. I was like,
I don't know.
Strange.
Maybe because I was watching on Crave, so it was only 720p. I don't know if that really changes anything there.
Yeah, it's rough, man.
It was
the CG like it kind of like meshes and blends when your clarity is that bad. Like
maybe I don't know. It certainly looked out of place. Like Cyborg specifically stuck out. Like
Really
you could
interesting.
see like his face looked like it was pulled out of the Cyborg costume.
I kind of liked the look of Cyborg.
I'm saying like the CG sucked. I'm not saying that
Oh,
the
fair
look is
enough.
bad.
You know, here's one thing I was thinking about by the way, during this intro scene, because we get that early scene with, I think, Mira and Falco talking. I don't know where that it takes place in the movie. Somewhere in the middle. It's hard to keep track. But they, at the time when this when it was before Aquaman, right? They were using this like air bubble methodology to like talk to each other, and then early on they were like talking like when they were just underwater. It sounded like dolphins, right?
Yeah, clicks and stuff
And
like that.
I think that, you know, in retrospect, what they did in Aquaman makes way more sense. It's like, fuck it, let's just have them talk, right? And this movie benefits in a lot of ways from being able to say, hey, we watched Aquaman and we saw Wonder Woman and we've seen these other movies, and now we can bring that context to this movie now. At the time, that wasn't the case. And so I think that actually helps a lot in a lot of ways, because it really helps to flesh out the characters, because this movie does, although it spends a lot of time with these characters early on before they join become the Justice League. And by the way, they never even use that word, which I think is kind of, I don't know how I feel about that. I kind of like the idea of them using the word, because it's like, why not? This is a comic movie, but like, it also does. It is a stupid
It's a
name.
dumb thing. Like it just given the rest of the
Right.
tone of the movie and how everything's
Or
going.
like some sort of Justice League.
You can't imagine someone taking the time to stop and say that.
Right.
It would come. It's like
Yeah.
right now. It's not even like they were. It's
Right.
Yeah. It's tough. Like I don't know. It's just.
Yeah.
It's not. They're not gonna. Like the end of the movie, right? They look at that abandoned building. It's gonna be the Hall of
The
Justice.
Wayne Manor.
We'll talk about that stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? At that point.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Fair enough. Where was I? What was I talking about? Oh, the context. So the scenes with Mira and Valko talking, I think, are much weirder now after seeing Aquaman. I don't know. What did you guys think that was the case? Like, it was like that they use these air bubbles instead of just. And by the way, Mira has a British accent in this movie.
I mean, it's weird enough, but it's easy to get over it. I think. It doesn't take me out of the experience.
Fair enough. Jim, what did you think of that?
I'm on the same point. I thought the air bubbles were cool. I think someone was explaining like in certain sequences, like they want to be kept like secret. So if you have that, the conversation can't like be picked up or something like that. But clearly, it was just, you know, they don't have the energy and time to devote to how the Aquaman movie is gonna kind of run. So they did what they thought they could do here, and it kind of mixes with Mara and Valko's powers, right, with the manipulation of water.
I do like, by the way, that fight scene underwater where like she uses the air bubble to have him fall through down instead of being able to float. I thought that was that's really cool, by the way, and it looked good. And Danielle, you're right. You should watch it in like a much better quality than 720p. Fuck, great.
Yeah, because I noticed that too. Like I was watching Crave is 720p, not 1080p.
Yeah, it's not even 10. It's not even 1080p. It's not even full HD.
Okay, so I watched it in 1080p the first time too, because I did that download or whatever, but it was just going to take too long.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I just fast forwarded quick, and I think I got to the sequence where you see like the for sale sign on the Kent farm, and the sign itself was like jaggedy, like the edges of it. I'm like
anti-aliasing, the aliasing. Or whatever,
it's like, oh man, but I just had to watch it. So
I feel like I'm spoiled with with having like a 4K TV and being able to watch things in 4K, and you go back to 1080p and you're like, this looks like garbage, and it's like that's not really fair because it's still fine, you know. But I think
what I'm saying is I think when it comes to the CGI. I like, for me at least, I can see the difference between the two resolutions on the same screen.
Here's a question. I know we talked about this in our last episode, but I think I want to touch on it just briefly. Thoughts on the aspect ratio? That it was shot in 4. Well, never mind how it was shot. We can get into that. Dan, did you notice or care?
Well, you certainly notice it, but I don't think that I cared. Again, it's one of those things that is it's a superficial thing. It doesn't take you out of the experience. You just get used to it. It's, you know, you can watch a movie in Letterboxd and it doesn't change anything.
Sure.
That really didn't bother me.
Okay, fair enough. And Jeremy, I know we've already kind of said your piece on this, but for posterity,
right?
What did you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, if we want to kind of let people in on our conversations, I think you said we talked about this a long time ago, and how you said I was against it or something like that. I don't necessarily remember that, but I just kind of looked into what this aspect ratio was. I was kind of disappointed when I heard about it, and then just knowing that you're not necessarily missing out on anything, and it's just the full frame.
Mm-hmm.
I think is kind of cool. And then when you hear some explanation as to why he wanted to do it this way, in terms of how
More
he's
verticality.
yeah, the verticality in terms of when you're framing these larger than life characters and action sequences, top to bottom matters more than left to right. And when I know that I'm not missing out on anything, like it's you're actually missing out when it is cropped and
Sure.
in that letterbox. I just like the openness of this a bit more. Obviously, I wish it was the full TV screen,
Mm-hmm.
but I think also like on my TV screen, it looked like I was using more screen real estate than if
hard
it
to
was
say.
cropped.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. If you were in like a traditional like what Man of Steel is on right behind us, it has the top and bottom bars, and it's there's a term for it. It's going to come to me like in a half an hour when I remember it, but it's not the same as like if you watch a movie or lots of shows on Netflix use the full 16:9 television screen. A lot of movies don't. They have the letterbox format, which is wider, right, but not as tall as a full 16:9. And essentially, and here's kind of how I feel about this generally, is that any aspect ratio that you watch anything in is ultimately a choice of the filmmaker, right? There's no like right way to watch a movie. So when you say like, hey, it was shot in this way and we're presenting it in the full frame, I think that actually is kind of admirable because and by the way, it's pretty funny because the HBO Max version of this movie, when you watch it on HBO Max, starts with a disclaimer that says this movie is presented in 4:3 to maintain the artistic vision of the director Zack Snyder, which I think is a pretty funny way to start a movie. But it's very similar to kind of how like there was warnings in the movie theater before you went to see Last Jedi that hey, there's a sequence where the audio turns off, so don't think that the movie's broken. You know?
Yeah,
And,
I think it's just because it's not the norm and people might be confused.
Well,
so just to get it out there quickly and give you a reason, you don't need to think about it any longer. It's okay. That's just it is what it is. And then it's up to the people to decide like if they like that full frame or that kind of closer, tighter look.
Yeah, and ultimately, like if we move back towards a more square type of format, then the TVs will adjust and it'll be more like that over time. I don't know if that'll necessarily happen.
You'll have to buy a new TV. So
you have to buy new TVs. And by the way, part of the reason that movies were shot or why this like widescreen thing kind of took off was because it was different from television. It was a way for movies to distinguish themselves from television, and it's ultimately all just artistic choices. For me, I would prefer a more traditional theatrical look for this movie as opposed to the 4:3. But and specifically if or being able to watch it in IMAX, which I can't do. If I'm watching in IMAX, then this
I think when the theater's open, it might be out there. I'd go see it again. But
me
did you see
4 hours in the movie theater though?
Did you see the BVS remaster trailer?
No. Is that also shot in 4:3 or presented in 4:3?
Well, like I don't know. I guess they announced like a month ago, but they remastered BVS. They did some like color grading to it or something like that. Okay. But they also they're also including the IMAX kind of full frame format whenever it was used, and they have a trailer where they show like a little bit of the nightmare sequence, and then all of a sudden like the top and bottom just expand, and you see more of like just kind of the sky with the parademons, and it just gives you like for me at least, I was like kind of convinced in that moment when I saw that. I'm like, oh, that looks kind of cool, like just seeing all of it rather than the tight close up, which is still cool. Yeah, it's definitely the norm and like kind of always been that artistic kind of framing. But just being unhinged and just seeing the full thing, I'm just not opposed to it. Like I don't think it's a bad thing.
Yeah, and the only reason we brought it up in the previous conversation is because I thought it was weird to then take a movie that was like, it's like, well, this is really cool, and we're gonna bring this to your home, and we're gonna put this on your everything you've always wanted, but then we're also gonna present it in 4:3 in a format that is really hard to watch at home, which I thought was like a strange choice, but I guess in context of everything that's gone on with this movie, it's not that weird, I guess, whatever, not a big deal. Okay, let's keep moving. I don't even know where to go from here. We're like, it's really like, it's like, where to even go? I guess maybe let's fast forward to the Superman stuff.
No. Let's go a little bit. Let's talk about the song choices. Let's start with the first one, which I actually liked. Well, Well, first
It's
of all, it was the
little on the
Aquaman
nose.
thing with
The
the
Aquaman
singing.
thing, yeah.
That one sucked. Um,
Wait,
I
so
will-
wait. So the song while he's like in slow motion on the crashing waves, it's like I see a king.
No,
or
no, no,
that
no, not
song
that one.
is.
Sorry,
That's-
no, that
okay.
one's cool. I'm talking about like the
women
song
singing?
choices. The women singing, that one was brutal. Went on
Yeah.
too long.
Yeah.
I'm talking about Lois Lane when we see her for the first time. We
Lois
get
Lane
a kind of
basically
a cool song.
Lois Lane has nothing to do in this movie. She has not.
What are you
She's
talking-
grieving.
She doesn't
she's
need
grieving.
to do anything. That's what she's doing. She's
and that's
grieving.
fine. It's fine. But
Clearly not.
she gets 2 scenes, and one of the scenes is with Martian Manhunter, right? Playing or transformed as Superman's mom, Martha, the titular the Martha. And I thought that although that scene is nice, it's but I feel like it's really undercut by the fact that it's actually Martian Manhunter. And by the way, I don't think Martian Manhunter needs to be in this movie. And that maybe is a larger issue with the fact that he's presenting this in, hey, there was going to be more movies. Whether we get them or not, he just was like, this is how I was going to present it, whatever. I think I would have preferred a different tack where he's like, I'm going to present this as if it's the last one. And we can talk about the epilogue when we get there, but I think the inclusion of Martian Manhunter in this movie is odd. And I understand why he was removed from the theatrical cut, because he has nothing to do in this movie. Also,
I mean, it makes sense for him to be cut. I think it's cool. I want to see Martian Manhunter in the movie. I think it's an odd way to introduce that character.
Yeah.
Just in terms of what's going on, what's happening with the real Martha. Of course, they're going to have a conversation later on.
Right. Was the Martha arrives later when they buy the house back or whatever.
You have to assume that's.
Is that the real one, or is that I guess so? I don't know. I think so.
So Martian Manhunter's in 2 scenes that definitely should have been cut, or he should have been provided with more scenes. Because really, if Martian Manhunter is there,
what's he been doing?
Why isn't he
doing?
Why isn't he just a part of the Justice League?
Yeah.
Why is
Well,
he
I mean, they know that. That's why they adjusted in some of the dialogue there. I mean,
yeah.
But, so I
music
think,
choices. Yeah.
Well, just first off with Martian Manhunter, the initial plan was to have a lantern, and Zack wanted Jon Stewart. WB told him no because they have plans for Jon Stewart. So
you think that's what that architect line on the headline is on that newspaper that they lingered on for no reason?
What?
Look, so there's right at that when it's raining, it's slow motion, and Lois is walking.
Yeah, that's the scene of the music that I was talking about initially. But
okay.
Yeah, I know there's a newspaper there that says something about a new architect for a bank. Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, we know that Jon Stewart is an architect. Is that what they're referencing there? I wasn't sure.
If they are, it's not.
Really loose.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I was just saying that. Yeah, they just settled on Martian Manhunter because they want to use a lantern. So initially, even in the epilogue scene, it was supposed to be either one lantern or Hal and John coming down to talk to Bruce.
That would have been sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that was kind of kibosh. And then just in terms of Zack's world with Man of Steel, BVS, and Harry Lennox being that character, he always had the plan for potentially him being Martian Manhunter. So I guess that part does feel a little kind of shoehorned in here, a little bit of an Easter egg, all that type of stuff. But and the special effects, I mean, it is what it is. But I'm just glad that the character exists in that world, and yeah, it'd be cool to see more of that. But yeah, that's a conversation.
Yeah, I think
related.
he's a great choice to play Martian Manhunter. He's a great actor for that. But he just has nothing to do here, and it just feels weird to include him. And you talk about a movie that's 4 hours. I understand why a studio would be like, no, we can't have a 4-hour cut. You need to cut things out, and that would be one of the first things I would cut. Out of my assembly cut, I'd be like, well, Martian Manhunter's not really doing anything here. He's not really providing anything interesting. Maybe you include him as the final teaser thing, like they did at the end. But you don't. Include
that's all it. That's all it was, because if you're gonna have that teaser, I think it's a little way too out of left field. I think the one before is a teaser for that, just to let the viewers in on it.
Teaser for a teaser is weird to do.
Well, if you describe it as that word, sure, but that's just what it is. Because imagine that not there. And then you see someone flying down. Oh, it's Superman or whatever.
Right.
But then it's just this weird alien or whatever. I don't know. I think if you're going to do it, you have to have 2 sequences at the very minimum, which is what they did. But yeah, just to throw it back to the Lois Lane sequence, I thought I just loved that whole sequence with the music, slow-mo, the rain, setting
Zack
up
Snyder
that she
appears in that scene, by the way.
Setting up that she obviously visits the memorial all the time. And then I just love how that transitions to later on, where she's kind of accepting that she's gonna move on, right?
Yeah.
And this is right. It's like right while the League is kind of come up with that plan to use the Mother Box to kind of bring him back.
Yeah.
And that's how they meet at the Heroes Park there. But I just like that whole just where her mind was at during that time. I think it just paints that perspective of like the lack of Superman.
I would have liked to spend more time with her. I think is ultimately how I feel about Lois, and that's and it's tough. It's like it's weird to say. I wish I had more time with Lois in a 4-hour movie. Like that's because it's like you have to do so much. So I kind of understand why. It's just there's just maybe too many characters, and that's maybe I don't even know what you even do with that.
Well, I think we only necessarily really need to see Lois when Superman's involved, and I think she's there in the beginning to introduce her and where she's at, and then she's back again when she's about to move on and he's about to come back, and then she's a key role, right, in terms of bringing Superman back to the living essentially, and then they have their sequence on the Kent farm, and that's basically it. Like we got other stuff to get to, so I don't necessarily see a lack of Lois Lane as a knock or whatever. I think it was we got what we needed with her. So.
I don't know. I feel like though, just given the way things happen when Superman does come back, like Lois Lane is sort of the emotional crux of the movie. Right, of turning Superman around. Like after that, it is just heroes being heroes. But in terms of like the human element, it's that, right? So I think you probably benefit from having more Lois and less of some of the other characters. I think this 4-hour version is great because we got a lot of Cyborg and there's a lot of
Cyborg is
that's where the emotion lives in this
I think that's the
movie.
issue. I think that's your issue there is that it's not that Lois Lane should be the heart. It's that she is the Superman heart version, right? Because Superman's not really in this movie. It's in and out, and like anytime we get reminded about Superman, I thought was pretty impactful because I almost forgot about him, and then when you use that music too.
I do love the music
because I think when Silas when he's kind of covering up when the Mother Box got stolen, right, and saying there's no or whatever, he talks about the Kryptonian alien ship and Superman and all that stuff, and I was like, oh yeah,
the Superman ship, and then they go
like, yeah,
and I was like, yeah.
So yeah, I just disagree with how I just feel like Lois, Superman, that's in one corner, and that wasn't like a massive part of the movie, but it's a massive part of Superman returning, and I think it serviced it fine. Like I think Cyborg and all that stuff is we needed more of that in terms of the League coming together and these key people at the time, because it's all this building up to get a god like Superman, on the team, because people argue, oh yeah, all you needed was Superman. That was more apparent, I think, in the theatrical cut, but I think here, even with the history lesson and knowing all the power that they had to defeat Darkseid at that time, having Zeus, and Ares and all these people, and even a Lantern, it showcases that the League now, even though they have Wonder Woman and Aquaman, it's just not enough.
Yeah, I mean, so let's go back to the music thing you mentioned. So Kevin Gregoire in the chat says the music choices made me laugh out loud. They were so bad. I think this is a couple. I've heard this critique of the movie now a couple times. I don't mind it as much, but I do think it is an odd choice to include all these like lyrical, like classical songs with lyrics in the like almost in their entirety in certain cases in the middle of these movies, and like it's very stylistic. And it kind of cuts back to that like mythology kind of thing. You're supposed to kind of just look in awe. Like for instance, at the Flash scene where he's
I love that scene.
It's a good scene, but also
I think it's brilliant. It's perfect.
Yeah, it's a good scene.
How is it not?
Because it's so disjointed.
Flash scene?
When it's slow motion and he's saving
when he meets Iris West.
It's when he's saving Iris.
Okay, because for the record, every Flash scene is a slow motion scene. So you gotta be more specific.
I guess I mean specific. Like it's his scene.
Well, I just said like the Flash scene, the introduction, I think is perfect.
It just feels so disjointed to me. Like it's like
really?
we're in Central City for like 30 seconds basically for that sequence. Then we get to the Batman one, which is we've seen basically that in its entirety in the theatrical release, and very, very little is changed there. In fact, I don't know if anything has changed in that scene.
I just think it was criminal to get rid of that Flash sequence with Iris West. I think it's just brilliant.
You don't even know it's Iris.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was Iris.
I think that's also a mistake.
Well, it's just some girl in a car, as far as I knew. Like,
that's
by the way, it's Iris.
That's fine. If you don't need to correlate it to that it's someone from the comics, those correlate. Like I'm just saying that in that sequence, if it is Iris or not, whatever, right? Like you get that connection between the two, and it showcases his powers and how they work.
Yeah, I think that's
It's
important.
a better way to introduce the Flash than what we got in the theatrical.
I don't even remember what the original version we saw. Like, what? How was the first time we saw the Flash?
Well, the first time was in BVS when Batman and Wonder Woman are looking at like the
Oh,
security
yeah,
camera
yeah,
footage.
yeah.
Like that was fine.
By the way, they referenced that in this movie again too. I completely forgot about that security footage, but it's like a key element of this movie, which I thought that amused me just because I felt like it was so long since I thought about those files, and everyone thought it was funny how like there was like he stole it from Lex Luthor and they had like logos for them already and stuff. We remember we thought it was funny. It doesn't matter. I just think it's like a fun like nod to that because I completely forgot about those things. Right.
And then for me, for that scene, which is probably one of my favorites, I just love how like it's so like obvious what he's saying. Like he says, "I'm so sorry, I'm late," like a million times in a row, and it sets the tone of like his humor and how it's just like right on the nose basically every time. I just think I think I laughed basically every time he opened his mouth. Like when it was like supposed to be like a jokingly thing. I love the part where he grabs the hot dog during that sequence, and he's just like smiling and puts it in his coat, and then he utilizes it to kind of do a cover up with the dogs with the meat snacks thing. So yeah, I liked Flash in the theatrical cut, but I just adored him this time around, especially with the added layer of the father and son, which we went back to and were able to develop on and kind of see that unique relationship with his dad. And it kind of sums it up at the end for me too when he says he taught him nothing he knows, which I really liked.
Right. I'm gonna have to agree to disagree because I just don't like Ezra Miller's Flash. I think he comes off much better. He's much more charming and less like just like it just feels less like the shoehorned in comic relief. In this movie.
Last time it was so obvious.
Yeah, and but like a lot of his jokes aren't really different, or they're still in the movie, and they were in the theatrical release. It just works better. I just don't like him as Barry Allen. I think, and I said this way before, I think he would have worked way better as a Wally type Flash.
But that really is a nomenclatural difference. Like, who cares? That's
Well,
about
because,
your
like,
relationship with the character.
sure.
That's not about the movie.
Yeah, Dan's
No,
right,
that's-
because it's
fair.
also and it's not the same, but like when you think about like the Robins and how many there are, I think with this self-contained kind of universe that is being built here, it's not supposed to service like all these different avenues and versions.
Right, there's
of
not going to be
characters,
4
essentially.
Flashes or whatever. Yeah, I guess that. So it's like this, like an amalgamation. It's like of all the Flashes, he's got like some Wally, he's got some some Barry. So
that's how I
in
kind
light
of
that. Okay, fair enough. It feels a little bit like hand wavy, a little bit like, hey, it's all the Flashes, but like I guess
it's just a different version, right? I mean, it's a multiverse. There's different Earths. There's different versions of the Flash. You can explain away most of that kind of stuff with that.
Sure. Kevin in the chat says they're going for an ADHD thing that they never quite nail with the Flash.
Yeah, like his character, because he's so like he has to slow himself down to speak to regular people, right? So he's
although I do like the effects of the Speed Force, like this, like the lightning bolts and stuff. I think that looks cool for the record.
I think they did that well. Better than Marvel. There you go. Like
better than Quicksilver.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Quicksilver looks stupid. It's like blurry whatever is going on there. Not a fan. Yeah.
The Speed Force stuff was crazy in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, it's important that they establish that the Speed Force is is a thing, and they mention it by name, and that it's like not quite the same as just being fast. Right, and they also try to make that clear.
Yeah.
So I think that's important, and then they do a good job of foreshadowing how his Speed Force will come into play at the end of the movie, which I think is really cool. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, loved it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the Superman revival scene, and I think it makes more sense in this movie that them coming together and digging up his body. I think that scene works better. I generally enjoy it, although there's some weird stuff. And by the way, I know it sounds like I'm kind of like shitting on the movie, but I'm just like, it's hard for me because these are things that I noticed in the film that I'm like, that is weird. It's hard for me to just be like pass it by and not mention it because there's some weird choices.
Well, nobody's saying it's a bad movie, but there are some glaring things that kind of stick out.
The one that in this scene specifically that just I'm like really like thought was weird was like, where did this picture of Pa Kent come from? It's like lying. It's sitting in this
he had,
like.
he had it in BVS.
So it's like what
They
is it in his
literally
pocket?
put it in his pocket when he's buried. Yeah.
Okay, so they cut back to this photo of Paquette like 5 times during this sequence, and it's like the same shot. Like it's reminds me of Commando, which is sounds stupid, but like they reuse multiple shots over and over in that movie, and it's obvious.
Yeah.
And like in this, it's like that's the same. Like nothing's changed. It's exactly the same. And I thought that was really weird, but that's a minor nitpick. But for the record, it's very minor.
Yeah,
but there's this like there's a line by the robot where the robot says the future has taken root in the present, and I was like, what the fuck is that line? It's a stupid line. It's dumb, and it doesn't really make any sense.
I think the idea is that robot isn't that like I don't know. Whatever.
It's
a Kryptonian.
It's his Kryptonian ship,
right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
The Fortress of Solitude.
Yeah, it's part of all that. It's what it's doing at that moment though. Is it's warning them against a future like catastrophe.
And
right?
by the way, I really like the flash forward to the like the
when it
cyborg
goes
gets.
wrong.
He's like, whoa, what the like? This is all good. And it like you have Superman crying, and you have like it's just like that's really cool. That's the best.
So I think it makes
part of
sense
that.
in that context.
But I just think the line is dumb.
That sequence is that the sequence where you see him floating and everything, like with Batman's head?
Who's floating? Sorry, what?
Like it's like the future reality where Superman's evil or whatever.
Yes, yeah. The first time we see that,
Okay. Yeah, that's where you see the dead Kilowog on the ground and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the Justice League. That's the first time you see Justice
League. And you also
League
see the Joker card ripped in half at that point too.
Right.
You guys saw that.
I didn't, but I'll take your word for it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, you could probably stop and capture a bunch of stuff for that moment, but I really like that part of it. But this idea of like, okay, we're gonna go forward with anyway. No, do it. They're saying, well, no, we shouldn't. It's like, okay, fair enough. And then we get the scene where they fight Superman again, and it's very similar, but in the
way cooler.
If I recall correctly, correct me if I'm wrong here. In the theatrical release,
yes,
Batman has like Lois Lane is like a backup plan for him.
Yes,
right. He like mentions that. That doesn't happen here, correct?
No.
I like the theatrical. I like that idea from the theatrical version.
But do you remember what I said? She's about to move on. It's the last time she's gonna visit Memorial Park. This all aligns in the perfect moment. I think it's way better this way. I think it's so cliche to say Lois Lane is always the key. He's always just gonna calm down.
It is that they talked about that for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that's. I'm saying that just to have her on standby is lame. Is what I'm saying. I think. I thought it was like beautiful how it was. They were both happening at the same time.
I get there's some serendipity there. I like the idea because again, I don't feel like Batman has enough to do in this movie. I like the idea that he had that in his back pocket, and that he took the words of the Flash from that flashback sequence where he talks about like Lois Lane's the key. Remember that from Flash?
Yeah, but
that
the
would
thing is
mean
that
something. Here.
Dude, the thing is that he talks to Diana about that after this happens.
Yeah,
it re-engages the conversation that there was a reason for that. Like he thought that was just a dream. He didn't think that was like a real thing that happened. So
the line is like it's like a premonition.
This is reinforcing kind of what that premonition or dream kind of meant, and he's trying to figure that out. We have all the answers in terms of knowing what the potential future is and all that stuff, but he doesn't.
So here's a question then. Is Cyborg seeing that flash of the potential future, or just are we the only ones seeing that?
Oh, no, I think just Cyborg saw it.
Okay, and he carries on with the plan regardless.
No, Cyborg says stop. He doesn't want to do it. He says he doesn't. He wants to abort it.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it's Batman that's really egging them on at that point.
Yeah, Batman he just wants to.
And Wonder Woman, I think, for some reason, also on his side there. But okay, fair enough. I mean, I have some gripes with it. They're more, I guess. I don't even know what they would be like. And they're not necessarily stylistic choices, but they're more like. I liked that version of the from the theatrical.
I can probably break it down. I think it's from a traditional movie going standpoint. It's almost too convenient that Lois, like that's the last time, and that ends up being the emotional crutch. But whatever, it does work. I agree with you, Jeremy. The serendipity there, it makes sense for this story that we got. So whatever, it's definitely keeping in character for Batman to have had that as a strategy, though.
Yeah.
That's a version of Batman that we're all familiar with. So either way makes sense. But I like what you said, Jeremy, about how now that Flash premonition is going to make sense to Batman, and that's going to dictate his actions going forward.
Right.
So now he has a reason to take that seriously, that Flash thing. Whereas before it was like, who knows? Like, it was just some vision. It may as well have been a dream. So now it has some credibility.
He said it is him because they were trying to say it wasn't him after the fight too. And then he comes in. It's actually a pretty cool shot. You see his like ears, like his silhouette, and he mentions that it is him because when he saw Lois Lane.
I did like that shot, by the way. Yeah, I thought that was cool. There's just not enough opportunities to use Batman in silhouette in film. Generally, I think it's just not. It does not work as well as it does in the comics. Okay, fair enough. So. Where do you guys want to go from here? Is the next question.
Let's hear more about the gripes, the nitpicks.
Well, I mean, let's talk about the things that that I did like. I liked the. I'm trying to think of the stuff that I like. Where do I want to like? There's a lot of stuff that I like. The final, not necessarily to skip to the final sequence, but just in comparison to the theatrical release, I think it works much better.
Yeah.
I don't think you can. One thing that I did appreciate necessarily, maybe a little bit from the theatrical release, was that the color grading was obviously a lot brighter. The colors were a lot brighter, and this movie is very gray brown, in keeping with like the I guess the visual style of BVS more so than anything. And I found that those sequences at the very end were harder to see. Than they were in the theatrical release, but the finale is just so much better in my mind than the theatrical. It just feels just so much more. It just makes so much more sense.
I think it's his best like finale, like build up action sequence he's done to date.
Yeah,
I think with all the moving pieces, with the Flash, like that was ridiculous. Like basically when they failed again, right? But then it's just so in the music. Oh, I was in love with that whole time. I just couldn't believe how different it was. And then when it ended with Superman and like Steppenwolf and all that stuff, you see Darkseid through the boom tube. He stares down the League. It's just levels better than what they had initially planned.
Well, The Flash stuff is I think really cool. They get to kind of have their like end game and eat like a cake and eat it too kind of here. Like they get to fail and succeed in the same movie. Again, we mentioned this earlier, but this idea that like as he approaches the speed of light, like time starts to move backwards. They kind of tease that in the Superman revival scene because his timing isn't perfect, but because
he says weird things happen too.
Yeah, weird things seem to happen. And I just love the idea of that you could see it all fall apart and the Flash kind of fail, and you kind of get to see like, man, he fucked up. Like he gets hit by that beam, and he's like he wants to heal, he can't move, and everyone's waiting for him, and he can't do it. And then it all comes back around. I think that's great. I really like that, and I think Cyborg is great in this movie too. By the way,
both of them are, and both of them get so much more room to grow the character. But in terms of that scene as well, it's so much better than him. They were, I think, in the theatrical, they just had to like save some family in like a.
Oh yeah. They have fuck that. Don't even talk about that fucking family. That movie's so that's
it was like some family in a station wagon that's driving.
They're in a house. The house was moving.
It's known as the Russian family sequence. It's, the Dostoevsky. It's fuck that. When Flash does, he does the thing, and then he connects with Cyborg because the plan, which they talked about before, was for Cyborg to get inside, right, and kind of separate them from the inside. How brilliant is it when we see, like, it's almost like a trick. It's like this mirage, right? They're telling him you can be whole again. Like I had chills when you see
his mom and his dad.
His mom and dad, but then Ray Fisher even just looking, at his
like normal,
at the cyborg self, right? It's just, it's like wow. And then the line, right? Like I'm not broken, I'm not alone. And then he just separates it, and then he calls on Superman to get in there, and then they separate. It's just the climax of this is just brilliant. In my opinion.
By the way, I like the scene with Cyborg when he's like in the internet or wherever the fuck he's in. Like I don't know.
Oh yeah,
I thought that was cool.
His powers.
Yeah, I think that was
his
really
dad.
dynamic.
I like how his dad, just kind of similar with Jor-El, and Jonathan Kent, just being that, a unique father
of
figure,
dads.
whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's always like a unique.
Yeah.
It's always like a unique situation.
Mhm.
And I just thought it was a cool way to kind of showcase that.
And it's
Just-
perfect
and-
exposition too, right? Because you can't
Exactly.
really, nobody knows what Cyborg's powers are, and it's
Yeah.
hard
Yeah.
to really explain it any other way.
Right.
I will say Silas's death felt unnecessary to me. Like he didn't need to be in that same.
It was unnecessary
room.
for him too, right? It's still a sacrifice, so I think that
Yeah.
works. Like
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
it's a maybe a wasted sacrifice. I don't know how to.
It
really,
seems like
Well,
it's like
it
he
is.
doesn't have
It
to
is
die.
at first. It is at first because you're like, the mother box didn't get destroyed. But I genuinely love this, like the dialogue that Flash, Cyborg, and Batman have there when they're kind of like they're figuring out that he did it on purpose so they could trace it.
Yeah.
They have like these. It's like very comic booky what Batman says, like about tracing this anomaly.
Well, it's like I have 13
anomaly,
satellites or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny too. He says he has 6 more or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just like that.
But he didn't have to stand in that same room with the laser. He could have stood outside there. He had a remote control. He didn't need to. That's
Yeah,
what
but
bugs
these
me. He
are-
didn't need to die. I get it. Like I
These are
understand,
all-
but
Yeah, I understand also, but like if you were to like put these nitpicks all together, it's always like based on like a physicality, like spatial type thing. I think we can kind of just get around it. Maybe he needed to be that close. I don't know. He was in that
Well, I
room.
mean-
He locked himself in. He didn't want to get hit while he's doing something. And also, maybe at that point in time, he thinks his relationship with his son is just done. Like it's too fractured. Because we kind of get that sense from Cyborg.
well, he
right? Where
sees the
doesn't wanna-
broken. Yeah.
He doesn't want to hear him as a father, right? He literally destroys the tape recorder as soon as
I
he tries
love,
to
by
be
the way, I
father figure.
love when he destroys the tape recorder.
Oh,
'cause
it's
I was
very
like,
good.
I was so
Very
like, I was like,
good.
what is he gonna say? Because
Yeah.
I was like, I
Yeah.
wanted to know, and then he breaks
And
it.
he's like,
no.
doesn't want to hear it.
And I like my headcanon at the time, like because obviously that happens like 2 hours before the end of the movie. I thought like, well, and he can like just absorb the information if he touches it. So it's like I was like it's there if he wants it, but then he rebuilds it later with the mother box, so it's fine. But like I just like the idea at the time, thinking, well, he got the message. We don't necessarily need to hear it, but then we get to hear it, and it's great. I just everything that I think the performance. Like, who plays Silas Stone?
It's that actor played one of the main scientists in Terminator 2.
Oh, by the way, I
you
guess
remember
the other scientist in that at Star
Oh,
Labs,
Ryan Choi, the Atom.
yeah, he's supposed to be the
cast him.
Atom.
He's
Yeah.
the second Adam. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's kind of cool. I thought the line where like from that like security guard, he was like, "Your thing is whatever the fuck is like." It's like, yeah, that's my thing. I was like, that's a clunky line. That is not great dialogue.
There's a few clunky lines.
I thought that was funny though.
Joe Morton.
Joe Morton. Yeah, I think he does great. He's just really good.
I honestly think that's probably. I haven't put too much on this, but probably the best out of all the additions is all the stuff that they do with Cyborg. I think that is the most effective.
What is
For sure.
crazy? Okay, so when I think about the theatrical release and the whole mess and everything about it, and it's just there's too many moving parts, but it is a little bit baffling that you would reduce Cyborg's role so much in the theatrical release. Like,
Yeah.
like I understand you need to cut the movie. Like he was given like it has to be 2 hours.
2
The
hours.
thing is,
right?
yes, the Flash cuts make more sense than the Cyborg ones do. But Cyborg is such an important part of this movie and how they actually solve
Right.
the problem that
And
you
it-
need to give that character more time.
If you go back to the theatrical version, Cyborg we complained about this movie. He just fucking shows up in the woods one day.
Yeah.
And he has
But
a
then we were
conversation
like-
with Wonder
but then
Woman.
we were
Like,
like-
what the fuck?
But then, like as it went on, we kind of all gave him props that like, he did good for what he,
Yeah.
Yeah, he has
showed
like
up
barely in the
for.
movie, but he was cool. Yeah.
And then now you get this completely added layer, and just a super important member of the team too.
So here is, before we talk about more things that we may or may not have enjoyed, my number one gripe with this movie. Okay.
there we go.
This is just a pure story problem, and Jeremy, maybe you can help me understand it.
Sure.
But we have the flashback to the original invasion by Darkseid, right? And he
So you're gonna
discovers
say,
that
how does he not know that the anti-life
where,
equation
yeah, how
is
does
on
he
this
fucking
planet?
not know where the hell where he left the equation, the anti-life equation,
He didn't have
the
it at
planet
the
that
time,
fought
did he?
back. He didn't.
No, he didn't leave it there.
Well, no,
He
they
didn't
said
have
like.
it yet.
Well, I guess he didn't. No, he didn't have it, but they found out that's where it was.
They found out later. He didn't know
Yeah.
at the time. Like I think he probably like putting yourself in Darkseid's shoes. Like he's like, ah, shoot, I was right there, but he didn't know.
Well, maybe, but this idea that he doesn't they don't recall where this planet was is really weird to me.
Yeah, I think I get it too, because they're talking about like how it's his greatest defeat, right? Which is why, you know, if there was a sequel, you know, the tease towards the end, like how he's gonna do it the old-fashioned way or whatever, and Ready Your Armada. I just think that when they explain, like, even with Steppenwolf, right, he wants to return home. We haven't talked about him, but like, decides that he's got to conquer like 50,000 worlds first or something before he can do that. So I guess, you know, and then even Darkseid himself, he's turned 100,000 worlds to dust. So I think he can, I guess, get mixed up just on your
just like
travels through the galaxy. And stuff,
I guess. Like, I don't know. That's why it's kind of weird to me. That like you have to do a lot of like mental gymnastics to make that one make sense.
Yeah, and you get all these visuals of like him or Steppenwolf jumping and then like slamming the ground and like
there's two distinct shots of them grabbing the earth and like with their fingers, and it's
that's when Steppenwolf is getting the answer through, like, what does he do before that, right? Like he gets shown something from the mother box, isn't it? Or
I don't even know how he discovers the anti-life equation is on Earth.
He just hits the ground really hard.
It's just there. It's just there, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. That's like you just kind of, there's a lot of, again, some hand waviness. Like, don't think too much about that. Just think about how cool it is that Darkseid's here, which is, for the record, cool. We got to see Granny Goodness. Yep. Desaad is in the movie. I really thought that this visual of them using this like former nuclear reactor piece of metal as like some sort of like
like hologram
thing. I thought that was like a really cool look because then like their mouths and eyes are like fire. Right. I thought that was just a really interesting design choice. Whether it makes sense, I don't really care. But having Desaad in the movie is really interesting. That like he's not. We get
a little bit of well, I mean, with Steppenwolf, obviously, like a million times better.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I really did actually enjoy Steppenwolf as a villain here because
what a cool character.
I don't know if his look is that cool still. Like he looks cooler than he did in the theatrical. It's better than theatrical.
To me, I was sold.
I think it's just like
I just like the movement of the armor and how he like the spikes would come out when he's like ready for battle. Right. There's like one specific one where you see them kind of shoot up when the Amazons have the arrows in him and he kind of flexes and they all like break off. I thought was pretty sweet.
Yeah, you have to hit him in the face, and that's when they realize they have to hit him in the face, and then he catches the arrow. Yeah, I mean. I think Dan disagrees, but I don't know. I actually do like Steppenwolf much more in this.
Wait, Dan, what are your gripes? Liked him in the theatrical cut more?
Well, no, I like this version much better. I'm just, Dan, what's your?
No, I mean I agree. Like from a character standpoint, definitely.
Well, he actually has a character.
He's much more room to do stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Much more room to develop the character. So yes, from that perspective, and from a visual perspective, though, it's just like changing some nondescript CG enemy to another nondescript CG enemy.
Yeah,
like,
but then
the visuals don't really matter to me in that sense. The armor's cooler than it was in the other one. I think his face is worse in this one than it was the other one.
Really, I thought
his face is like weird. Squished into that helmet. You can't even see. Like, it doesn't really do anything. It's not important. He's just a CG bad guy, but I don't know. I don't think the visuals are that much improved.
What about his voice? I liked his voice. I thought it was cool. Sure. He had like it's just like the way he talked. That and like they use that same line from the trailer that we got and the theatrical, but like there are no protectors here. Is like a really cool
that's a
monologue.
Sweet line. Yeah, it's a great line. I wish we like. If we want to talk about him as a character, though, I wish we almost had more of a backstory for him because he has to take over 50,000 worlds, whatever. Why?
Yeah, well, we get that. It's just a tease, right? In terms of his history with Desaad too, right? Because they mention that he did some sort of embarrassing thing, or
it sounds like
or whatever.
It sounds like he tried to take power at one point.
Maybe it's hard to say, but that's the point. It's like why is it important to him? Why is he doing these things? What's this character's motivation? We know that Darkseid is controlling him, and that's kind of it. We know that he owes some sort of a debt, and that's kind of it. In terms of, what this character's trying to do, I think we need more backstory to understand what his motivations really are. It doesn't make it's just like everything else in the movie. It's very superficial, and it looks great, but when you think about it, it kind of breaks down.
Mm-hmm. Jeremy, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I can see your point. I also think that there's like if there were sequels, right, which was the plan. I think that would have been fleshed out with the Desaad character. I think there's obviously more to that character than what we got. He's a bit higher ranked. He's obviously in the middle of the two of them. So I think we would have got more answers there, but
Yeah.
I just think it's cool that we kind of, Steppenwolf, just a very deadly, dangerous, powerful enemy. We just see him kind of ripping through, doing his thing, and it's essentially just the tip of the iceberg, right? Like when he dies, Darkseid just squishes his head. Like that's fine by me. Like let's get on to that show now. Like
yeah, which we may or may never get. Which is just like I think by the way, part of it is frustrating, and I understand where the kind of like the hashtag restore the Snyderverse or whatever it comes from, because if you watch this and you really fucking loved it, and it's just that's it. Because like here's the thing, this movie comes out like at the same time, like a week ago. The quote from Zack Snyder was he's done with the DC stuff, right? Who knows whether or not that he'll follow through with that or whatever, but it's just like there's a lot of this mixed messaging where you're like, okay, well,
it's not necessarily up to him. Like he has said that his intent was to finish the 5-film arc. He kind of accepted that the studio wanted to go in a different direction. He's obviously been, just a complete, transformation, or just with the fans kind of, wanting this and him being able to fully realize and finish his version. I'm sure if he was offered to finish it, he would keep going. But
what do you think?
It's not
what do you
up
think
to
the
him.
actual chances of that are, in your opinion?
Well, like I said even a while ago, like when we first, like when the news first broke that this was happening, like I couldn't believe it for one, and I was just so happy for him and for the people who like his version, and I'm all about his kind of take in his tone. It does something for me a little bit more deeper than the Marvel stuff. Not to say that those don't have deep stuff too. Like they certainly do, and you can find them there. I just like this take, and so just looking on the from what I've seen on the internet, and just how big this thing has gotten in terms of just how much it's been shared and tweeted and all this stuff. I mean, I'm sure they're going to look at the analytics of all that and decide whether it's worth it for them to continue this and have this content on their streaming platforms, which seems likely. But the thing is that the actors have to want to come back. Right. It's almost not even worth it if Henry doesn't want to come back, or Ben. In my opinion. So.
Yeah, and like how much more Ben Affleck Batman do we really want necessarily? Like that's the other thing too. So which brings us to, I think, the epilogue, and then if there's something we missed or forgot to talk about, I'm sure we'll circle back.
I feel like we're going to talk about this movie again,
but
in your future.
Yeah, probably. But let's talk about the epilogue. I think the epilogue is the worst part of this movie. Do you guys agree or disagree with that?
It's a super cool sequence, but it doesn't fit into the movie.
No, not at all.
I think the movie can end like it's almost like it can end with that climax action sequence, and just a little bit after whatever it ends with. But I think just in terms of this quote unquote journey, if you want to be meta about it, and just the expectations on what they set out to do, I think it's great that we kind of get all that epilogue stuff, almost treating it like it's a post-credits sequence.
And it's a bunch of post-credit sequences, basically,
just kind of squished together.
Yeah,
like for instance, like the before we can get to the nightmare sequence specifically, but like we get a different version of the Deathstroke scene. That Deathstroke scene, by the way, this version of it was supposed to lead into the standalone Ben Affleck Batman movie, which we never got, and was scrapped. And so that's kind of, it's like whatever. That's a lingering thing that is just kind of a cool idea that Deathstroke's out there and he's hunting Batman. Okay, fair enough. But the nightmare sequence, in my opinion, completely like reshapes how I see this movie. I think it's pretty freaking good until that nightmare sequence, and I'm like, this doesn't need to be here. And a lot of it, I feel like, is a lot of the new stuff. I don't know how much of that stuff.
Yeah, so that's the thing. The only things that were shot new, which is 4 minutes, is that particular nightmare sequence.
Oh, no, just that entire. Okay.
Yeah. So when you see Ezra Miller there, we don't even see him that much, but it's super cool because we get to see him in that BVS.
He's got that
outfit,
and he's
got
that's the mustache and stuff.
So that is the sequence that Zack kind of directed him from, like, through Zoom or whatever.
Oh yeah, when he's on the set of
they got a little bit of that.
Beasts.
So they brought Mara and Joe Manganiello or whatever.
Joe Manganiello, I believe.
And Ben came back, and Ray, and obviously Jared Leto. So
Yeah.
And it was all tied around the fact that Zack, wanted to just have Joker and Batman just meet, even if this is the end as well.
Right. I guess
So I also feel I'm the same way. Like, to me, this is the post credits. It's a post credits sequence.
Sure.
It's not meant to invoke like the themes of the movie or tie it up. This is a post credits sequence showing you a day in the life of that, nightmare sequence, and who's at play and what's happening.
But it leads you to believe that they did fail. Or that they will fail somewhere down near future.
Well, I mean,
right?
All we know before that is that Darkseid is going to come,
right?
So
and Lois is going to die,
they're going to beat
basically.
Them. Yeah, well, we see Lois dead in that sequence in the Batcave with Superman and Darkseid.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think knowing that like most of that sequence was actually reshoots for this movie. And by the way, I can't it's crazy that they cost that much for that, but like.
What did?
Those reshoots to get this nightmare sequence cost how much. It seems like more than it makes sense. But I don't care about the budget. This is the same argument I have about sports stuff all the time. Like, I don't care how much someone gets paid on a sports team. Like, it's not my money.
Yeah, I don't think the nightmare sequence added a ton of money, though. I think you're.
Oh, maybe, I don't know. All I'm saying is
the money was for the finishing
of
the CGI.
Right. To finish like
all the Cyborg, all the Flash. All the Steppenwolf was all done in under a year.
So what bugs me then here is that like he chose to add this scene, and it feels so much more disjointed, and he didn't have to add it. Like
that he wanted to. Like, part of this is that it's a passion project, right?
Yeah.
And like Jeremy, you said that he wanted it. If I ever had the opportunity to direct a Justice League movie, and I would try to find every way to have Joker and Batman have a conversation in it, right? Like,
yeah,
and to the credit, I had low expectations on like how that would play out, but I found it pretty good. Like, I thought Jared Leto's Joker. If I think of Jared Leto's Joker, I remember this sequence of him. I don't remember anything of what he did before. I think
he's not really in much stuff. That's kind of the thing. Like, he's in obviously Suicide Squad, but like. He's not really even in that movie that much, So
yeah, well, that was all a recut mess too. Like, but here, I don't know. It worked for me. Like, I laughed right away when he called Mara a fish stick. I just liked his tone and his kind of weary voice. I like when Batman said his whole piece and then he stood at him or looked at him and then started shaking, like he was actually scared. To me, it all just worked.
I couldn't disagree more. Like, none of that scene worked for me, including the shoehorned in
specific like sequence between Joker and Batman.
Okay,
Dan,
fair enough. I think that's the best part of that sequence. And I do like the idea.
No, I would agree with Jeremy on this one. I loved every minute of that sequence. Actually, I don't think it doesn't reshape the movie for me. I do.
No, me neither.
Look at it because it's also a nightmare sequence, right? So that it's effectively like a dream sequence or a flashback.
Yeah. Well,
it's part of the movie, but it's not part of the main story.
But it becomes after the climax where they beat the bad guy, and now it's like, oh, did they? Kind of, you know what I mean? Like, it's not
fine. It's not like it's finite. Like,
the reason I'm thinking about this is because it's in context of this is the last thing out of this universe, and you put it in anyway, and it.
But yeah, you were also going into the mindset of moving on into this
part
film.
of it, yeah, a little bit.
So that's gonna hinder your opinion, right? Or form
only in the sense that, like, I think putting this in makes it harder for anybody who liked this movie to move on. Like, it's intentionally.
Go ahead.
I just it feels like it's an intentional kind of last little jab at the studio.
I don't know, maybe not. The way I read it, and I understand why you have an issue with it, because it's part of the main movie, and it is at the end of the movie, and it kind of undercuts the climax. I get all that, right? This is a point in the movie where it's meant to be denouement. You're meant to be wrapping up the story, and this is introducing kind of a new kind of question mark.
Yeah.
Yeah. So whatever, I get it. Like, honestly, the way that I read it is like, I know it's a bit of a meta perspective because I know that this is a movie. There's a whole bunch of stuff that was left on the cutting room floor, and he wants to fit it all in. I genuinely think they're like, we have to have this in there somewhere, and it doesn't fit anywhere else. Just tag it on the end.
Yeah, I guess
this also fits with the previous, like when we saw Darkseid killing Aquaman, right, when he was using the mega beams in Atlantis.
Oh yeah, I do.
And
that
then,
is cool.
And then Wonder Woman, dead, being like,
with her arms cut off. I think it's pretty brutal.
I don't remember.
No, she was. What? No, she was.
She has like coins over her eyes, but
yeah,
I thought
she's holding her sword. She's not.
Oh, she's holding her sword. I was like, it's a very quick scene. I was like, did they cut off her arms? I thought it was like, I was like literally like, that is crazy brutal. I thought it was cool. Either way,
that's not
what happened. It's fine.
The point is that she's dead. So
yeah,
in this nightmare sequence at this point in time, even Mara mentions it, right, that Aquaman's dad was killed with his own trident, essentially. So it's tied to that potential future, and then this just shows you that there is a Justice League 2. This is trying to be made in a vacuum essentially, but this is with added kind of overseeing of what's happened and what you get to play with now, and then the studio or HBO Max allowing him to kind of just doing more of the nightmare stuff, which is Zack Snyder. Yeah. And I think it fans of this are going to really enjoy that sequence. I think if you're not in the mindset of moving on and wanting, that whole mindset, then this is going to jazz you up.
I don't know. That's the part of the problem. It's like it's hard to divorce those things. But there is an element of like, I know that this is the last one, so it's weird for me to. It seems weird to include it. But I also the other perspective is like, well, you're right. He just wants to get everything in there, and there's not a lot of not a lot of oversight here. Zack Snyder can do whatever he wants basically with this movie. So, I think in a theatrical release of this movie, assuming this is the movie that originally came out, and it's not, because that's not necessarily how you would never release a 4-hour cut, right? I think in a cut down version of this movie, that sequence might not even be in the movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think don't read into it too far, right? Because it's a premonition thing, right? So it's hazy, it's open to interpretation either way.
I was just really on board for the movie, and then that happened. I was like, man.
And ultimately, with things like that specifically, you can explain it away with the multiverse, right? Because that is a different Earth. Maybe that is their future. That's not necessarily this one's future.
Fair enough.
But, whatever, right?
Yeah. So here's a question for you guys. Do you really think this movie needed to be rated R? I really don't think it did. Like, there's 2 F-bombs in it, and I don't think either of them need to be in there, to be honest. Like, and you don't necessarily need the blood in the Amazon sequences. Like, you can get away with a lot of that same stuff without the blood, and I think it's just as effective. I don't think this movie needs to be rated R. It's a weird choice in my mind. I don't know.
Needs to, who knows? But I think it benefits from it.
Does it?
The Amazon sequence does, yeah.
I don't, just by there being more blood, like
just the whole tone of it being that much more mature and that much more serious.
I just don't know. We'd be that much different.
Doesn't need to be careful, and like he doesn't care.
Right.
Like if these people just destroy worlds and it is that mythological type take, then I think to be family friendly, just so more eyes can get on it, I don't care for that really.
Yeah,
because it's definitely not rated R for the sake of being rated R. So that's why it shouldn't be a point of contention. It just
happens to be because that's what they want. I mean, but then at the same time, that F-bomb at the end of the movie does feel a little
just
bit
the swears though, right? Like there's the F-bomb with Batman.
Well, the F-bomb at the end is not good. I don't. Yeah. But like you're right. It's like it's just the nature of the movie. Yeah. Also, Batman still uses that weird like laser gun again in this movie, in this version of the cut, and I thought that was for sure a Joss Whedon thing. It wasn't. I was like, man, that's okay. Fair enough.
What else is he supposed to do?
He uses the gauntlets that.
No. In the gauntlets are cool, but in the later on, it's not in the same sequence.
I would disagree. I think. Wait, which sequence?
It's in the finale. He uses the whatever the same weapons that the
parademons.
Yeah, but in the theatrical cut, he's literally just like, it's like a medium shot of him, and you just see him like. Well,
yeah, that's way worse.
And this one, he's like moving around. He's getting his ass beat, but he's still moving around. He saves the Flash at one point. Mm-hmm. I just felt like, because I knew that he wasn't integral to that sequence before, I felt like that he was here, but I also knew that people are going to bash it because he's not doing as much as the others. But I feel like he did what he could do and what he needed to do. And again, but it's that take of that kind of struggling Batman, like amongst these superheroes, essentially.
Sure.
So yeah.
Okay. Is there anything that you guys want to touch on that we didn't touch on?
Not off the top of my head, but I mean, there is 4 hours of movies. So.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I'll just quickly say I really dug Alfred in this movie. I thought Alfred's like top-notch Alfred in this movie. It's like a small. It's who cares, but like I really liked his like that little scene with Wonder Woman where he talked like where they're making tea.
Yeah,
I thought that was like I really liked that.
Yeah, you need nice little things like that just to break up the pace.
Yeah. Jeremy, what about you? Anything you want to quickly mention? Shout out.
Yeah, like I think, like I said before, The Flash, some of my favorite stuff here. I laugh so like pretty generally like most of the time when he was making his jokes. One that I remember too at the end there with his dad, he just says like when his dad's getting all excited, he's like, "Dad, you're gonna get maced again." I thought that was
yeah, that's good. Okay, fair enough. So this movie eventually leads into technically into Aquaman as like an official like sequel to it, technically,
right?
Quote unquote. It works better as a sequel now. It feels more connected.
You see him in like the exact same coat and the exact same truck driving away, like that you see him in the beginning, I think.
That being said, Mira's characterization is different. I'm fine with that because obviously there's a major shift in tone, and that's just how it is. That movie's fine as is, and I liked Mira in that movie, so that doesn't really bother me. But that is something that is, I guess, different. Otherwise, I think it's more cohesive now. I would say, can put kind of a bow on it. I'm happy we have a much more cohesive 3-movie arc for Man of Steel, BVS, and now Justice League than we did before, where it felt like we got 2 and then kind of, at the end.
Yeah.
We now at least have that completed vision. Whether or not we get the rest of the movies or not doesn't really matter to me. Like, we have this now, which is pretty good. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if we're doing final thoughts, I would echo a lot of what you just said. It kind of takes everything that the first movie did and improves upon it, which and in a lot of areas it really needed that improvement.
Yeah, you said like it's better than the original. I was like, that's a low bar. I was like, it's like that first one was like we were so disappointed.
It's not only better than the original, but it's better than the original in every conceivable way. So that it has that going for it. Of course, it's too long, but that doesn't really bother me too much. I did find myself more so than any other DC film thinking like I'm watching a comic book with this movie.
Yeah, it's very pretty.
Like, there is some of those scenes
like a splash page after splash page,
which is so perfect.
You can see the comic panel sometimes to a fault. There are some and this is more the writing side of things than the visual side of things. But there are some moments that are too comic booky for a movie where things like there's one that sticks out in my mind of the Flash having saved somebody. It wasn't Iris, it was somebody else, and then he says something completely out of context. I wish I wrote it down. And it's like I can 100% see that in a comic book, and that kind of stuff is forgiven in comic books.
Right, because it's one thought bubble or
it's
word
just
bubble
one pane, and then they're in the next pane, and they're doing something else, and it makes more sense in a comic book. It doesn't in a movie, but whatever. Those
it was a thing that Flash said.
Yeah. I don't worry. I'll watch it again.
Is it when they like after he saves all the like when they're saving the hostages?
Yeah, it's at a moment that felt like it should have been serious, and he says something that's more like related to a different character than who he saved.
Oh.
Anyways, I'll try to find it and get a better reference for you guys.
Sure, I mean, but then that makes sense.
But like that kind of that affected my viewing of the movie because I felt like it was a comic book sometimes in too many ways.
Well, and
whatever.
We talked about this, I think, Jeremy, on text message on Thursday, which is that in the pre-show, the virtual red carpet that they did, and you mentioned Kevin Smith, and he I think does it like a pretty good job interviewing Zack Snyder in a kind of
he's a great interviewer.
You just in that setting, it's weird because it's obviously like very staged. It's less organic. But this idea of this multiple parts, right? Because it's like what 6 parts, I think in an epilogue.
Seven with the epilogue, yeah.
Right. So that it's like, well, it's kind of like multiple like trade paperbacks being, or like individual issues being combined into like a trade paperback, right?
You spend time on this character, then you go to this character. Yeah.
Sure. And I was like, I was concerned that it's going to feel too disjointed because one of the things that turns me off with comic books is that element where it's like I have a really hard time going single issue to single issue to single issue unless it's all collected in a trade paperback.
Yeah.
Then it works. But even in those cases, when you have like different artists on different like in different issues, it becomes less connected for me, and it's harder for me to stay connected to like the cohesive story. I kind of sometimes lose it when I'm reading a full comic. There is an element of that here, but it's not as bad as I was. Worst case, it was like, oh man, like each thing is going to feel way disjointed compared to like the next sequence. It's not the case. But
yeah, actually, surprisingly, the entire 4 hours kind of flows very well, which is something that none of us predicted. I don't.
So I'm glad to see that that's true. That being said, I don't necessarily know if you needed like the title cards for each chapter element. Like I don't know how like it's cool that they have like cool names and stuff, but I don't know if it really.
I think it was also designed for the home viewing. Elements.
So you can stop and go to the bathroom,
basically. Because I know I paused every time there was a title card sequence.
I only stopped twice during this movie. Once to go to the bathroom, once to grab a snack, and they were at title card sequences. So
all I want to do was eat snacks while this was happening. I wanted to just constantly shove food as all this crazy shit was happening.
Man, no, it's not even snacks, man. This movie requires meals. This movie requires you to
you need to pace yourself. Like you can't start with like a big meal at the beginning. Like it has to come maybe closer to the middle when things have calmed down a little bit, you know? Yeah, okay, fair enough. This movie, like you said, Dan, it is too long. But
whatever.
But it's like but at the same time, whatever. Like with this movie, I feel more than any you can write that off as like it doesn't. In this case, because it's at home, it's for home viewing and all this stuff. It doesn't really matter. Could you imagine sitting in a movie theater for 4 hours? That's a different ask. I think that's a lot more of a commitment.
This movie at IMAX, I don't know, man. I think that'd be a whole different experience, a whole different level of engagement.
It would, but I would need an intermission. Like give me like a break.
Yeah, there is one. There is one.
Yeah, there has to be.
I think there's a 10 or 15-minute intermission. I think
you have to have it. You'd have to.
Yeah,
I mean, it's non-negotiable in my mind with this. Okay, Jeremy, any final thoughts?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I thoroughly enjoyed it the entire 4 hours. Like I said, I just wanted to constantly shove snacks in my mouth and just enjoy this epic ride. I just love seeing all the characters, the development, the backstory. I thought it was paced surprisingly well, like we just mentioned. I felt it transitioned properly from scene to scene, like the music. Wow, like the music is just so good. It's the previous one. It's just so trash. Like,
and the thing is, like, I don't necessarily. It was Danny Elfman, right? That did the last.
It was the intent, right? It was the remember this. It's the member berries, right? Like let's bring in the old Batman theme song, the Superman one. Like, I there's a place for that too. It's just it wasn't here clearly. Yeah. Which is why we're even getting this version. But yeah, like obviously I'm gonna keep close watch on the conversation around this, and if I had to vote, if I wanted to see more of this, it would easily be a yes. I can't conceive like why you would just say no, like if you had the option.
Here's the thing: if the answer is yes, as long as we don't have to endure like years of this like Twitter, so social media stuff. Like I just don't need that in again. I don't need any more of that.
Well, I think the idea is if we get more of this, we won't have that because it'll be more of his actual of Snyder's vision.
No, right? I'm just like I'm concerned that to get more of it, it's going to take more of that, I'm like I can't get on board with that.
I don't love talking about that side of things, but my concern would be like that's going to exist regardless at this point. Even though this movie came out well, there's going to be an entire group of people that are going to choose the opposite side just because they feel like they have to.
But will it be as loud as the
Hopefully not. I don't want to lend any credence to it. It's going to happen, and that kind of stuff makes me sick.
Yeah,
really.
I mean, fair enough. Jeremy, okay, so fair. I stepped on your element there, but go ahead.
I'm excited to kind of just that this movie exists. It's out there, and like with other Zack Snyder movies, we tend to discuss them just over the years. We've talked about how we've had this notion that he's ahead of his time and all these types of stuff. Mm-hmm. I think this is a very unique project and undertaking in this genre. So yeah, I just can't wait to see what people kind of say about it and the new things people discover from it or new takes they come away with it. And also a rewatch. Just kind of, I want to see it again. Obviously,
it needs some time. I think if I do rewatch it, I hope it's in IMAX. Because that's really the way it's intended to be viewed. And Zack Snyder in that interview with Kevin Smith talks about like, oh, and he was watching it on IMAX screens. He noticed all these extra little things that he didn't see before. I'm like, that's cool. I wish I could do that. So like that would be sweet. And Jeremy, I totally echo your kind of sentiment about like just like digesting the kind of discourse around this now that it's out.
Yeah.
Which was like the complete opposite of how I felt about the discourse around this movie before it was out. Right.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because like I'm interested in people's takes online, and I'm going to listen to a couple different podcast reviews probably. Some of the old IGN guys have their own movie podcast now, so I listen to that. I was like, there's going to be a bunch, and I'm going to enjoy that almost probably as much or more than the movie experience itself, but that's just me. And I don't know. So that's exciting for me. I'm happy that we can kind of get back to that element and hopefully kind of put to bed some of this more I don't know. Get toxic is maybe the wrong word, but divisive. Yeah, exactly. Divisive kind of discourse, or divisive, if it depends how you want to say it.
Either is acceptable.
Okay, well, I think we can wrap it up there. You can follow us on Twitter at Tower Babblecast, Facebook.com/Tower Babblecast, and head over to our website, TowerBabblePodcast.com or TowerBabble.ca to find everything that we do, including that really old article that I wrote many, many years ago. You can help support the show if you enjoy the podcast and you would like to help keep the lights on. Head over to patreon.com/TowerBabblecast. That's BABBLE, the conversational way. I haven't made that distinction in a while.
I think it's easy enough to find.
It's pretty like it. Yeah, I mean, you just look at your phone or whatever you're using to listen to it. It's right there in front of you. But anyway, patreon.com/TowerBabblecast. $5 a month, you get access to our film club, which is our bonus content, and it makes a huge difference in terms of what we can do with the show. It's really exciting. And again, we're doing Red Planet this month, so stay tuned for that next.
We're doing
week.
Mission to Mars.
Sorry, not Red Planet. Mission to Mars. Well, I mean,
we talked about doing Red Planet as well, but Mission to Mars is the official movie.
Are you sure it's not Mission to Mars : Red Planet?
Red Planet is supplementary. It's encouraged.
Please,
it'll enhance your experience, but Mission to Mars is the official.
Do you get
movie.
bonus marks if you watch that one?
Sure, yeah, you get bonus marks if you watch John Carpenter's Ghost of Mars and a million other Mars. movies.
No. Don't watch John Carpenter. Don't watch the
Unknown.
Don't watch the John Carpenter one. That movie's not good.
Last Days on Mars. That's the other one.
Those with all the Mars movies?
Approaching the Unknown, Last Days on Mars, John Carpenter's Ghost of Mars, Mission to Mars, and the Red Planet.
What about
maybe some
Mars
others.
Attacks?
Yeah, Mars Attacks.
Okay. Anyway, you can find that on our Patreon. And we'll be back with more. By the way, I should mention this before I close out. The Oscar nominations.
And the Martian, obviously.
Right, obviously. That one spends a lot of time on Mars. The Oscar nominations have been revealed, and most people probably have not seen any of the Best Picture nominations. There's 7 of them, I believe, this year, which is less than the 10 max that they can have, and less than it's been like 8 and 9, I think, the last couple of years. So that a little bit less you need to watch for our annual Oscars. What the heck do we call it? I don't even remember what we call it, but it's like the pre-Oscars conversation that we do where we talk about each of the best films, the Best Picture nominations, as well as make some predictions around who we think might win or who we might want to win, depending. Right. There's actually 2 categories, spoilers. So go take a look at those. We're going to be on the next kind of news show. We'll talk around about all the noms kind of more just casually, but stay tuned. I always get excited about our Oscar show. Now that the Oscar noms are out, start watching those movies. There's some pretty cool movies on that Best Picture nomination list. But again, it's still the Oscars, so they're not going to be it's not going to be Justice League. It's not going to be nominated. Not those types of movies. But talking about homework, start watching those because we're going to start watching them soon, and we'll start talking about them more soon as well. So stay tuned for that. We'll be back with more Tower Babble very soon. Stay tuned. Have you guys seen the